Imagine if I shared with you that long before the great deluge arrived, celestial beings came down from the heavens to our world and twisted everything that had been created? That these angels who fell from grace didn't merely turn against the Creator, but went further, instructing humanity in knowledge that was forbidden, things we were never supposed to learn. The account I'm about to share with you goes beyond ancient myth. This is the key that's been missing. The explanation for why our world deteriorated so completely that the Creator needed to wash it away with a flood. In this video, we're going to explore the full chronology of these fallen angels, step by step, starting with their initial act of rebellion, moving through the giants that came from them, the forbidden wisdom they passed on, and the divine reckoning that came afterward. When we reach the end, you'll see why this narrative was viewed as so threatening that numerous attempts were made to wipe it from the historical record completely. Now, before we begin, if this is your first time here, think about pressing that like button, and go ahead and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. When you support us, it allows us to keep bringing you content like this, videos that help you discover something new or just relax. Oh, and tell us your location and what time it is where you are right now. More than 30,000 people have become part of this community, a place where you can meet and interact with others who think like you, all in the comment section below. So, with that said, let's jump right in. The descent of the Watchers. High above the cloud layer, in a place where human eyes had never reached, there existed beings made of pure light. These were known as the Watchers. Their bodies shimmered with heavenly radiance, their wings stretching across distances that would make mountains look tiny. For countless eons, they fulfilled their role as guardians over creation, watching the stars dance and the slow rotation of distant planets. Mount Hermon stands like a giant at rest within the ancient terrain, its summit piercing upward into the sky, crowned with eternal snow. It was here, at the meeting point of ground and heaven, that the unthinkable took place. The divine intersected with the mortal world in ways that would alter both forever. The descent didn't announce itself with thunder or trembling ground, but rather with silence, a deep hush that seemed to absorb all sound around it. After that came light, though not the soft illumination of morning, but something intense and not of this world. Brilliant streaks tore through the sky, each one representing a guardian plummeting down toward our planet. 200 angels made this choice. 200 beings who had once stood before the Almighty were now falling like stars ripped from their homes in the heavens. Wings that had once carried them in perfect flight now became weights, pulling them down toward the earth below. The atmosphere around them crackled and burned as divine substance collided with mortal air. Mount Hermon shook, not simply from their landing, but from the significance of what this instant represented. The boundary that had been so carefully kept between the celestial and earthly realms had just been violated. Beyond mere disobedience, this marked a fundamental alteration in the structure of creation. The Watchers had stopped being observers and had become participants. Every angel in descent carried knowledge that existed only in the highest reaches of heaven. The secrets of how things were made, the underlying mechanics of existence, the true names that held power. All this heavenly wisdom was now falling toward a world that wasn't ready for such things. The earth appeared to sense the approaching tempest. When they made contact with Hermon's mountainside, the forms of the angels started to transform. The pure radiance of their celestial bodies grew dimmer as they took on weight and substance. For the first time, they experienced gravity's grip, felt the odd sensation of air entering newly created lungs. Mortality started seeping into their eternal nature like liquid soaking through fabric. The mountain became where they assembled, their new dwelling between two realms. In this place, they would make decisions that would reverberate across thousands of years. Here, they would create connections that heaven had never meant to happen. The Watchers had come down, yet they hadn't entirely fallen. That deeper transformation was still waiting ahead. Down in the lowlands, early humans continued their uncomplicated lives, completely unaware that everything was on the verge of changing. They couldn't have known that the glowing phenomena they spotted on the mountain's peak would soon deliver gifts beyond their wildest dreams, along with consequences they couldn't measure. The scene was prepared for the most significant rebellion in the entire history of creation. Prior to the fall, the celestial hierarchy. In the very beginning, before time carried weight or space had limits, perfect order existed. Heaven extended beyond what mortal comprehension could grasp, populated by beings of light and intention. Every angel occupied their position, fulfilled their function, held their sacred responsibility within the magnificent architecture of creation. Upon the highest throne resided the source of all radiance. Surrounding this divine presence moved the seraphim, beings of absolute worship whose existence itself was melody and adoration. 6 wings covered them in modesty, their voices weaving harmonies that created the very foundation of reality. Beyond them positioned themselves the cherubim, protectors of divine secrets, their appearance both magnificent and fearsome to witness. The archangels delivered divine intention throughout the universe. Michael the warrior carried a blade capable of cutting through dimensions. Gabriel brought announcements that could transform entire worlds. Raphael bore healing that could repair the fabric of existence itself. Each one served with flawless dedication, their might equaled only by their submission. Beneath these powerful beings lived innumerable hosts of angels, each possessing their unique abilities and roles. Some cared for the stars, others directed the winds. Still more maintained the fragile equilibrium of living organisms. All functioned in harmony, their separate wills completely synchronized with divine purpose. Within these celestial hosts existed the Watchers. Their assignment demanded that they observe without interference, witness without participation. From their heavenly stations, they looked upon creation, documenting the slow choreography of planets and the gradual emergence of life. Theirs was a calling of absolute patience, endless watchfulness without involvement. These watchers held knowledge that other angels didn't possess. They grasped the secret operations of creation, the hidden designs that controlled reality. They understood how physical matter responded to spiritual force, how thought could transform into form, how divine energy could alter the material realm. This understanding was simultaneously their blessing and their weight to carry. The hierarchy represented more than simple structure. It embodied the perfect movement of divine will through all of creation. Each level accepted instruction from those above and conveyed understanding to those beneath. The sequence remained intact, the structure maintained, the balance kept. Heaven operated like an enormous instrument, every being performing their role in a never-ending symphony. Yet within this flawless structure, something began to stir. The Watchers, blessed with the gift of observation and burdened with comprehension, started viewing creation through a different lens. Their constant surveillance over the lower realms awakened something that had never previously existed in heaven, a wondering about what might lie beyond their designated functions. They observed as humans took their initial steps, uttered their first sounds, created their first connections of affection and society. The angels watched these creatures fashioned from earth and dust, discovering the gift of free will, the capacity to determine their own paths within the limits established by divine instruction. Gradually, almost without notice, the Watchers started to question what it might be like to select rather than simply follow orders. The hierarchy that had previously felt like sanctuary started to feel more like confinement. The roles that had once provided meaning started to appear like restrictions. The perfect structure that had maintained heaven for ages began to reveal the initial hairline fractures that would ultimately split creation itself. Heaven remained as it was, yet within the consciousness of certain angels, the seeds of uprising had been sown. The fall hadn't yet commenced, but its shadow was already stretching across the celestial domain. The world before the deluge, humanity's era of wonder. Prior to the rising waters, before judgment descended, the earth experienced a period of marvel. The world spread out green and abundant, unmarked by barren wastelands or deserts. Waterways flowed with crystalline purity, their courses gentle and steady. The weather maintained a perfection that required no changing seasons. Endless spring blessed every region of creation. Humanity existed in purity during these earliest times. Their existence unfolded without the relentless hardship that would later come to define mortal life. Nourishment grew plentifully with minimal labor. Creatures came near without terror, their natural behaviors still matching the peaceful purposes of their creation. Death remained far off, aging happened slowly. Pain was uncommon. The initial generations lived for hundreds of years, their physical forms robust, and their intellects keen beyond what future ages could conceive. They recalled their beginnings with precision, handing down accounts of divine creation across innumerable generations without the corruption that time typically causes. Their relationship with the sacred stayed direct and immediate. These ancient humans had capabilities that would appear miraculous to contemporary eyes. Their grasp of natural principles went deeper than simple watching. They could perceive the invisible designs that ruled growth and restoration, connect with animals in manners that went beyond verbal language, and exist in balance with powers that later generations would either dread or venerate from a distance. Family connections extended across centuries. Great ancestors knew their offspring 20 generations down the line. Understanding gathered across lifespans that approached nearly 1,000 years. Each individual functioned as a breathing archive, holding within their recollection the complete chronicle of their people from the absolute beginning. However, despite all their abilities, these ancient humans remained innocent of particular forms of knowledge. They knew nothing about combat or brutality, having no reason to inflict harm on one another for materials or land. The planet supplied everything they needed, and their population stayed reasonable, distributed across enormous territories with space for everyone. They had never witnessed the forging of metal armaments or sampled the bitter plants that could bring death. The methods of trickery and dishonesty remained foreign to them. Their feelings flowed clean and straightforward. Frustration without malice, grief without hopelessness, happiness without the dread of its conclusion. At nightfall, they assembled to exchange tales and melodies, their voices lifting in harmonies that appeared to make the celestial bodies shine more brightly. They existed in groups, but without the intricate power structures that would later separate their descendants. Authority arose naturally from understanding and experience, not from violence or craftiness. Their connection with the divine stayed uncomplicated and unmediated. They communicated with heaven as youngsters communicate with caring parents, without dread, without ceremony, without the elaborate practices that later generations would create to span the widening gap between ground and sky. Communion flowed like respiration, effortless and unceasing. The earth itself answered their presence with abundance. Vegetation grew fuller and more flavorful where human hands nurtured them. Water sources ran more clearly where human steps walked along their edges. The actual soil seemed to acknowledge and embrace these children of creation. Yet innocence, regardless of its beauty, stays delicate. The reality that humanity had experienced since their origin was about to meet forces beyond their comprehension. Above them, the watchers looked downward with increasing interest, getting ready to bring knowledge that would convert paradise into something considerably more complicated and considerably more perilous. The era of wonder stood at its zenith, unaware that its conclusion was descending from the heavens on wings of radiance and darkness. The Covenant on Mount Hermon. The peak of Mount Hermon had transformed into a meeting place unlike anything in the history of creation. 200 angels formed a circle beneath stars that had observed the birth of galaxies. The mountain itself appeared to pause its breathing, recognizing the gravity of the choice being made upon its slopes. Samyaza stood at the center of the circle, his appearance still glowing with celestial radiance, yet somehow dulled by the seriousness of the moment. As their selected leader, he carried the weight of what was about to transpire. The other angels gazed toward him with combinations of eagerness, dread, and intense resolve. "We have observed for ages beyond measure," Samyaza's voice traveled across the silent summit. "We have watched while keeping our distance. We have seen beauty and wonder while being prohibited from taking part." His statements fell like pebbles into motionless water, each one generating ripples that moved through the gathered assembly. The covenant they were considering went beyond rebellion. It signified a basic decision to surrender their identity as eternal beings for something unknown and hazardous. They would exchange immortality for involvement, divine separation for mortal participation. The cost was banishment from heaven. The prize was liberty to determine their own direction. Each angel voiced their true name as they entered the agreement. Ancient words of power rang across Hermon's heights, connecting them in collective intention and collective fate. These names would later be written down by human scribes as a list of the fallen. Yet in this instant, they symbolized hope. Hope for something beyond the functions that had characterized them since creation's beginning. The pledge they made was frightening in its directness. They would come down to walk among humanity. They would give their divine understanding to mortal consciousness. They would choose brides from among the daughters of humans and produce children that would span the distance between heaven and earth. United, they would confront whatever results their decisions might produce. Yet, underneath these voiced promises lay deeper drives that each angel held in quietness. Some were pushed by isolation. Eons of observation without fellowship had eroded their hearts like water eroding rock. Others felt inquisitiveness blazing within them like a fire that could no longer be restrained. Still others were stirred by what they named love, though none could determine if what they experienced for humanity was genuinely that holy feeling. Azazel spoke of the offerings he would deliver, the mysteries of metalcraft and weaponry that would push human civilization ahead by millennia. Penemu committed to teaching inscription, the method of preserving thought in symbols that could outlive memory. Kazdee would disclose the secret movements of celestial bodies and planets, opening up astronomical mysteries. As each angel announced their planned contribution, the scale of their decision became evident. They weren't simply deserting heaven. They were readying themselves to convert Earth into something it was never designed to be. The understanding they possessed would speed up human advancement at a rate that might break the delicate equilibrium of creation. The covenant was completed not with markings or ceremonies, but with a unified act of intention that echoed through both heaven and earth. The instant their agreement became final, something altered in the cosmic structure. The carefully preserved division between divine and mortal started to become unclear. Above them, the stars appeared to waver with doubt. Beneath them, the earth trembled with expectation. The watchers had become something different, not completely angelic nor yet mortal, but something in the middle. They had selected transformation over constancy, involvement over safety, affection over obligation. The agreement of Mount Hermon would resound through history as the moment when immortal beings selected mortality, when observers became contributors, when the established structure of creation confronted its first major challenge from inside. Their descent into the realm of humanity was no longer simply physical, it had become spiritual, emotional, and permanent. The Forbidden Union, daughters of humanity. In the lowlands beneath Mount Hermon, human communities spread across the terrain like blossoms in an extensive meadow. Here dwelled the daughters of humanity, women of loveliness and elegance who had captured the focus of beings whose eyes had previously looked only upon celestial marvels. What started as watching from heavenly elevations had evolved into something more profound, more intimate, more hazardous. The angels moved among humanity for the first time, their divine appearances cautiously concealed in flesh that could appear mortal, yet something about them stayed unmistakably otherworldly. They moved with an elegance that appeared to resist the pull of gravity. Their voices held harmonies that mortal vocal cords couldn't create. Their eyes contained depths that revealed knowledge beyond human grasp. Women felt drawn to them, the way flowers turn toward sunlight. These beings provided something that human men couldn't: affection that held the power of heaven itself, focus that felt like divine favor, safety that appeared absolute and eternal. The daughters of humanity discovered themselves carried away in relationships that surpassed anything their species had experienced before. Initially, the union appeared like legends becoming reality. The angels treated their selected women with offerings beyond imagination. They talked of faraway worlds and performed songs that made the spirits soar with desire for locations it had never visited. They conveyed visions of loveliness that existed beyond the physical dimension, affection that went beyond the limits of mortal comprehension. Each relationship formed a connection between realms that were never intended to link. When an immortal being decided to love a mortal woman, both were transformed by the meeting. The angels experienced feelings they had never encountered: envy, ownership, the terror of losing something breakable. The women found themselves raised beyond their natural condition, touched by power that changed them on levels they couldn't grasp. The prohibited character of these unions only strengthened their intensity. Heaven hadn't approved these relationships. Divine instruction had been explicit about the division that must be kept between celestial and earthly beings. Yet affection, or what the angels thought to be affection, had demonstrated itself more powerful than cosmic structure. As the relationships intensified, the angels started to give more than devotion. They disclosed mysteries that had been concealed since creation's beginning. They instructed their brides in the actual names of stars, the hidden characteristics of minerals and plants, the expressions of power that could shape reality itself. Understanding poured from divine intellects to mortal spirits like wine from an overflowing vessel. The women transformed into more than human through these disclosures. Their comprehension broadened beyond natural boundaries. They could perceive farther, reason more sharply, shape their environment in ways that appeared wondrous to their community members. Yet with broadened consciousness came the dreadful burden of knowledge that mortal minds weren't constructed to hold. Settlements started to transform around these altered women. The uncomplicated patterns of early human existence became complicated by fresh longings, fresh possibilities, fresh temptations. The daughters of humanity discovered themselves trapped between two realms, no longer completely human, yet not yet divine. Their very presence became a challenge to the natural structure. The angels, in the meantime, realized that affection was more intricate than the flawless feelings they had experienced in heaven. Mortal hearts introduced mortal difficulties. Their selected women aged, even if gradually. They could be injured, could experience pain, could be taken away. For beings familiar with certainty and permanence, the fragility of mortal affection became both blessing and burden. Yet, from these impossible unions, something fresh was starting to develop. Life was taking shape that would hold the blood of both heaven and earth. The women who had won angels' devotion now held within them the beginnings of a fresh kind of being. Children who would receive both mortal flesh and divine nature. The forbidden had transformed into fact. The impossible was forming in human wombs. The daughters of humanity were on the verge of becoming mothers to a race that had never previously existed in all of creation's extended history. Birth of the Nephilim. The birthing spaces resonated with sounds that had never previously been heard on our planet. The cries of women in labor combined with something else, a vibration that appeared to originate from beyond the physical realm. The children being delivered held within them the nature of two realms, and their very presence sent waves through the structure of reality. The first Nephilim came forth larger than any human infant had ever been. Their mothers, enhanced by angelic power, endured births that would have been unthinkable for regular women. Yet even these strengthened human bodies were pushed to their boundaries by what they delivered into the world. The offspring of angels required more from their mothers than mortal flesh was constructed to provide. From their earliest instance, the Nephilim showed capabilities that identified them as different. Their infant eyes contained consciousness that appeared ancient, as if they recalled things from prior to their birth. They developed with supernatural rapidity, achieving the dimensions of adult humans while still youngsters in years. Their power surpassed that of full-grown men, while they looked to be simple youths. Yet size was only the most apparent of their abilities. The Nephilim had intellects that could understand ideas their human family members found difficult to comprehend. They absorbed languages without instruction, dominated skills through watching alone, and showed comprehension of natural principles that their father's angelic understanding had made reachable to them. As they developed, the hybrid character of their existence became both blessing and burden. They could communicate with powers that humans couldn't detect, shape matter in ways that appeared miraculous, and reach memories that belonged to their celestial ancestry. Yet they stayed connected to physical bodies that, despite their improvements, were still basically mortal. The Nephilim's desires matched their dimensions and capabilities. They needed more nourishment than human settlements could readily supply, more excitement than basic human society could present, more tests than the peaceful world of their time held. Their very existence started to burden the materials and social frameworks of early human civilization. More concerning still were their emotional requirements. The Nephilim received their father's ability for powerful feeling, yet lacked the divine character that supplied angels with flawless self-restraint. Affection transformed into fixation. Frustration transformed into fury. Inquisitiveness transformed into compulsion. They felt human feelings amplified by divine strength, a mixture that demonstrated hazardous for both themselves and those surrounding them. Some of the Nephilim displayed exceptional understanding and employed their abilities to benefit human settlements. They became commanders and instructors, giving their received knowledge in ways that pushed human comprehension of healing, farming, and natural philosophy. These giants existed among humanity as caring governors, employing their power to shield and direct their smaller family members. Others, however, discovered different outlets for their hybrid character. The mixture of supernatural capability with unlimited desire guided some Nephilim down bleaker directions. They started to view humans not as family members to shield, but as materials to take advantage of. Their requirements transformed into orders, their longings transformed into instructions that few could reject. The world started to reorganize itself around these fresh beings. Human communities either prospered under the safety of caring Nephilim, or experienced hardship under the control of those who selected tyranny. The uncomplicated equality that had previously defined human connections gave way to power structures founded on strength rather than understanding or age. The angelic fathers observed their children with combinations of satisfaction and increasing worry. These offspring represented their rebellion's achievement, evidence that the limits between heaven and earth could truly be violated. Yet they also disclosed the unexpected results of divine mortal union. The Nephilim were magnificent, yet they were also hazardous in ways their makers had not predicted. The planet itself appeared to answer their existence. The delicate equilibrium that had maintained the world since creation started to move under the impact of beings who were neither completely natural nor entirely divine. The age of purity was concluding, substituted by an era of strength, understanding, and the intricate moral tests that accompanied both. The mysteries of heaven are revealed. Azazel stood before an assembly of humans, his hands manipulating metal with unthinkable skill. The raw material answered his contact as clay answers a potter, streaming into forms that mortal intellects had never imagined. What had required heaven's forges eons to master, he now instructed to creatures scarcely removed from their creation. The understanding of metalworking transferred from divine intelligence to human inquisitiveness in a single day. The sounds of pounding soon resonated across valleys that had experienced only the gentle patterns of farming life. Bronze yielded to iron, iron to steel, steel to combinations whose characteristics appeared to twist the principles of nature. Armaments came from these fresh forges, blades that could split stone, lances that flew with unerring precision, protective coverings that deflected strikes that would have broken bone. Yet metalwork was only the start. Throughout the ancient world, other fallen angels opened their mouths to give mysteries that were never intended for mortal speech. Penemu assembled scribes around him and disclosed the method of inscription, demonstrating how thoughts could be seized in symbols that would outlast memory and death. Human intellects, abruptly capable of keeping and distributing knowledge across generations, started to speed up their advancement at rates never seen before. Kazde raised his eyes to the night heavens and started to identify the stars, not with the uncomplicated labels humans had assigned them, but with their actual celestial identities. He disclosed the secret movements of planets, the invisible impacts that streamed from cosmic bodies to earthly occurrences. Astrology came into being as humans learned to interpret the heavens like an extensive scroll holding the mysteries of time and destiny. The understanding streamed like water through a shattered barrier. Barakel instructed the secrets of lightning and weather, demonstrating to humans how to forecast storms and control the force of the winds. Kokabeel disclosed the locations of the stars and their concealed significances, opening human eyes to navigation methods that would transport them across previously unmapped seas. Women assembled around angels, who gave different forms of prohibited understanding. They absorbed the methods of enhancement, how to improve their natural look with cosmetics created from minerals and plants whose characteristics had been recognized only in heaven. They found colorants that could produce shades more brilliant than anything nature created naturally, fragrances that could awaken feelings with supernatural strength. The rush of disclosure converted human society with astonishing rapidity. Settlements that had stayed basically unmodified for generations abruptly discovered themselves with reach to knowledge that transformed every element of their presence. Farming progressed by millennia in simple decades. Building soared beyond earlier restrictions. Art and music achieved levels of intricacy and loveliness that mirrored their makers' contact with celestial standards. Yet with each mystery disclosed, something basic about human character started to transform. The purity that had defined early humanity couldn't endure the obtaining of knowledge that held moral significance. The capability to produce armaments unavoidably guided to questions about their employment. The power to shape others through cosmetics and mixtures brought up matters of trickery and dishonesty. The angels had planned to raise humanity through their offerings, yet they realized that knowledge without understanding could transform into a weight rather than a blessing. The humans who obtained divine mysteries discovered themselves able to perform actions their predecessors could never have conceived, actions that weren't always helpful to themselves or their settlements. Some among humanity started to employ their fresh capabilities for individual benefit rather than shared welfare. The understanding of metals permitted the production not simply of implements but of restraints for securing adversaries. The comprehension of plants guided not only to healing but to toxins that could eliminate competitors in concealment. The methods of enhancement transformed into implements for trickery and dominance. The earth itself appeared to fight under the burden of hurried advancement. Terrains transformed as humans absorbed how to pull metals from deep within the soil, to modify the paths of waterways for their advantage, to reorganize forests and mountains based on their longings. The balance that had previously existed between humanity and nature started to split under the force of employed divine knowledge. Heaven, observed with increasing distress as the delicate equilibrium of creation leaned toward disorder. The mysteries that had required eons to advance in the celestial domain were being compressed into human involvement at a rate that risked overwhelming the very bases of mortal existence. The rule of the giants. The Nephilim no longer concealed their character. Throughout the ancient world, these offspring of angels and humans ascended to positions of authority that their capabilities made unavoidable. Standing twice the stature of regular humans, having strength that could topple trees and understanding received from celestial intellects, they became the governors of a world unprepared for their control. Cities developed around them like blossoms around powerful oaks. The Nephilim didn't simply govern, they reorganized civilization based on their improved comprehension and supernatural requirements. Enormous stone frameworks ascended from the earth, their assembly demanding methods that wouldn't be rediscovered by completely human cultures for thousands of years. These weren't simply structures but landmarks to hybrid ambition. Each giant formed territories that mirrored their separate character and received abilities. Some produced centers of instruction where human pupils assembled to obtain filtered versions of angelic knowledge. These Nephilim transformed into philosopher rulers, governing through shown understanding and authentic concern for their smaller subjects. Under their direction, human comprehension of healing, astronomy, and natural philosophy progressed by centuries in individual generations. Others pursued different directions. The mixture of supernatural strength with unlimited desire guided certain Nephilim to regard humanity not as younger relatives to be shielded, but as materials to be used up. These giants required tribute that pushed human settlements to their breaking limit. Their desires developed beyond what the earth could naturally supply, compelling innovations in farming and hunting that started to interrupt natural equilibriums. The bleaker elements of Nephilim governance slowly overshadowed the helpful ones. Giants whose received angelic recollections contained knowledge of delight and feeling started to investigate earthly involvements with a strength that mortals couldn't equal. Their festivities became renowned for their surplus, their feasts for their plenty, their longings for their intricacy and force. Some Nephilim realized that their improved character made regular human nourishment inadequate for their requirements. They started to use up not simply the flesh of creatures, but to cultivate desires that appalled their human family members. The boundary between nutrition and predation became unclear as certain giants discovered that only the most extreme involvements could fulfill their hybrid character. Their impact distributed through human society like ripples from stones thrown into motionless water. Settlements competed to assist the most powerful Nephilim, presenting tribute and loyalty in trade for safety. Trade paths advanced to provide the giants' requirements, transporting exotic nourishments and materials across distances that had earlier appeared unthinkable to cross. Yet the rule of the Nephilim held the beginnings of its own ruin. Their improved capabilities accompanied improved requirements, and those requirements developed with each passing generation. What had started as caring governance slowly converted into a framework of taking advantage that exhausted the materials and spirit of completely human settlements. The giants started to battle among themselves as their lands broadened and their desires clashed. These weren't human disputes, but conflicts between beings whose strength could flatten mountains and whose received knowledge contained the mysteries of combat learned in heaven's most ancient struggles. The earth shook under the force of their conflicts. Humanity discovered itself trapped between rival Nephilim groups, compelled to select sides in disputes they could scarcely grasp. The uncomplicated farming settlements that had defined pre-deluge civilization yielded to militarized societies structured around assisting and enduring their giant rulers. The natural world started to oppose the transformations forced upon it. Waterways ran crimson, not simply with earth, but with the result of supernatural struggles. Forests that had endured for millennia were eliminated to supply the giants' building activities. Creatures escaped regions where the equilibrium between predator and prey had been broken by desires that nature had never constructed to fulfill. Some among humanity started to call out against their situations, appealing to the heaven that had produced them to observe what the earth had transformed into. These voices ascended like incense, transporting accounts of suppression and disorder to divine ears that had been observing with increasing worry. The rule of the giants had converted the world from paradise into something considerably more intricate and hazardous. The earth that had previously been a meadow was transforming into a battleground, and the pure children of creation were trapped in the center of a struggle between forces they could neither completely grasp nor successfully oppose. The earth calls out. The actual soil appeared to moan under the burden of what the world had transformed into. Where previously abundant fields had extended toward far horizons, the earth now carried marks from struggles between beings whose strength could reorganize terrains. The soil that had readily produced crops to gentle human hands developed hesitant to maintain settlements pushed by the requirements of their supernatural governors. Waterways that had streamed clear and pure for millennia started to stream differently. Some held the crimson mark of struggles that had poured more than human blood. Others transformed paths completely, redirected by Nephilim engineering activities that assisted the giants' requirements while interrupting ecosystems that had kept flawless equilibrium since creation's beginning. The creatures were the first to perceive the basic incorrectness that had entered the world. Beings that had previously come near humans without dread now escaped at the scent of communities shaped by angelic knowledge. The natural balance between hunter and prey, between predator and the pursued, split under the force of desires that belonged to neither earth nor heaven. Ancient forests started to decline, not from sickness or absence of water, but from something more profound. A spiritual toxin that penetrated into the very nature of developing organisms. Trees that had observed the first sunrise now released their foliage out of period, their roots fighting to extract nutrition from soil that appeared to oppose the unnatural impacts streaming through it. The winds themselves held a different characteristic, colored with sounds that had never previously existed in the natural world. The balanced melodies that birds had performed since creation yielded to severe cries that revealed confusion and pain. Even the insects appeared influenced, their uncomplicated designs of life interrupted by powers they could neither grasp nor modify to. Human settlements discovered themselves trapped between the earth's developing opposition and the requirements of their Nephilim rulers. Crops, unsuccessful not from natural reasons, but from the soil's clear refusal to maintain the frameworks that had developed up around assisting the giants. Water sources that had never run empty started to unsuccessful, compelling movements that delivered different groups into struggle with each other. The most perceptive among humanity started to have dreams filled with pictures of cosmic imbalance. They witnessed visions of the earth as a living being twisting in pain, calling out for relief from weights it was never intended to hold. These dreamers transformed into prophets of fate, cautioning their settlements that the present direction guided only to ruin. Some humans started to recall accounts from their earliest generations. Stories of a time when the world had been different, when the connection between heaven and earth had pursued designs that delivered blessing rather than burden. These recollections awakened desires for a restoration to the ancient methods, though few could conceive how such a restoration might be achievable. The corruption wasn't simply physical, but ethical and spiritual. The knowledge that the fallen angels had given with humanity held moral implications that mortal intellects fought to handle. The capability to produce armaments guided unavoidably to questions about their employment. The force to shape natural powers brought up matters about the correct connection between produced beings and their surroundings. Children delivered into this transformed world knew nothing of the paradise their predecessors had encountered. To them, the moaning of the earth appeared natural, the struggles between giants, normal, the taking advantage of human labor by supernatural beings, just the way existence functioned. Yet even they sometimes experienced movements of something different, ancestral recollections that revealed a superior way. The cries that ascended from the earth were more than figure of speech. They were actual vibrations in the spiritual domain, pain signals that held through dimensions beyond the physical. The balance that had defined creation since its start was being substituted by disharmony that arrived all the way to the throne of heaven itself. In celestial halls, where flawless structure had governed since before time started, the sounds of earthly pain could no longer be disregarded. The uprising of the Watchers had created results that risked not simply human civilization, but the basic constancy of creation itself. The Earth's cries for fairness and relief had arrived at ears that possessed the force to answer. Above the disorder and corruption, above the fights of humanity and the desires of giants, divine focus started to concentrate on the world with a strength that guaranteed transformation. The age of unchecked uprising was approaching its conclusion, and the universe itself appeared to pause its breathing in expectation of what would arrive next. The judgment of the Watchers. In the highest heavens, where time moves in different ways and space curves based on divine intention, a council assembled that would reorganize the fate of both Earth and the rebellious angels who had made it their dwelling. The throne room itself appeared to pulse with an authority that could unmake worlds with a single expression. Yet the judgment that started to take shape held the delicate accuracy of flawless fairness. Michael the Archangel stood before the divine presence, his blade already vibrating with the force that would be required to execute heaven's order. Next to him, Gabriel readied to deliver announcements that would resound through both celestial and earthly domains. Raphael prepared his restorative powers, understanding that the approaching judgment would demand restoration as much as punishment. The accusations against the Watchers were spoken in voices that made the bases of reality shake. They had deserted their designated functions, broken the holy limits between heaven and earth, and brought knowledge that had twisted both human purity and natural structure. Their children had transformed into tyrants and predators. Their instructions had guided to brutality and taking advantage. Their very existence had thrown creation out of equilibrium. Yet the judgment that pursued held more grief than frustration. These weren't simple rebels, but angels who had assisted faithfully for eons before their descent. Their offense wasn't hatred of goodness, but misled affection. Affection that had guided them to decisions that delivered pain rather than blessing to those they attempted to assist. The verdict was declared with certainty that permitted no challenge. The Watchers would be connected in restraints of spiritual blackness, confined in locations beyond the arrival of light or ease. They would stay conscious of their destiny, yet powerless to flee it, capable of observing the results of their actions, yet unable to interfere or make corrections. Some would be thrown into deep valleys, filled with eternal flame, their immortal nature tormented by fires that blazed without using up. Others would be connected beneath mountains, their strength turned against them as they fought forever against connections that developed more powerful with each attempt at fleeing. The most rebellious would be pushed into abyssal depths where neither time nor space pursued natural principle. Azazel, who had instructed humanity the methods of combat, would be thrown into a desert location where sharp stones would pierce his body for eternity. His offering of metalwork would transform into his burden as metal instruments of suffering surrounded him in endless variation. Penemu, who had disclosed the mysteries of inscription, would discover himself in a domain where expressions transformed into breathing organisms that turned against their maker. The judgment broadened beyond the angels themselves to their children and the world they had twisted. The Nephilim, despite their combined ancestry, couldn't be allowed to pursue their governance over humanity. Their very presence signified a break of natural principle that risked the constancy of creation itself. Yet their destiny would be different from that of their fathers. Being part mortal, the giants couldn't be confined in the same manner as pure angels. Rather, they would confront a different form of conclusion, one that recognized their human ancestry while recognizing the unthinkability of permitting their pursued presence. The earth itself would be purified, and in that purification, the hybrid race would discover its finish. Yet the divine judgment held mercy next to fairness. From among humanity, one family would be kept, a line that had stayed pure despite the corruption surrounding it. Through this family, the human race would pursue beyond the approaching disaster, transporting forward the finest of what they had been, while leaving behind the worst of what they had transformed into. The agents of judgment obtained their directions with the same flawless submission that had always defined heavenly assistance. Michael would connect the rebellious watchers, Gabriel would caution the righteous of what was approaching. Raphael would ready restoration for the world that would come from the approaching tempest. Each archangel's function was accurately characterized and absolutely required for the restoration of cosmic structure. As the heavenly court readied to perform its order, one final component stayed to be handled. Among humanity walked a man whose righteousness had captured divine focus. One who might assist as an intermediary between the condemned angels and their celestial judges. This man would transport announcements that no other mortal could hold, observe scenes that would shatter regular intellects, and document testimonies that would resound through the ages. The mechanisms of divine fairness started to rotate with the unyielding force of cosmic principle. What had been initiated by the Watchers' uprising would now discover its finish in judgment that restored the correct structure of creation. The age of giants and fallen angels was approaching its conclusion, yet not before one final chapter would be inscribed by a human scribe selected to document the conclusion of the world as it had been. Enoch, the scribe of judgment. Among all humanity, one man walked in a different manner. Enoch moved through the world with intention that others couldn't understand. While his community members cared for animals and planted crops, he looked upward. The heavens called to him in ways that resisted uncomplicated comprehension. The disorder beneath had arrived at a breaking limit. Giants wandered the earth, their desires without end. The sons of the Watchers used up everything in their direction. Blood saturated the soil. Creation itself moaned under the burden of corruption. Something needed to transform. Heaven noticed Enoch's pure spirit. More than simply another human, he held within him the capability to span two realms. His feet contacted earth, yet his spirit could rise beyond the clouds. The divine domain perceived in him what they required most, a messenger who could communicate to both sides. The summons arrived like thunder enclosed in murmurs. One instant, Enoch stood among his people. The following, he discovered himself raised beyond mortal comprehension. Angels surrounded him, their bodies blazing with radiance that should have ruined human eyes. And yet, he stayed intact, shielded by the grace of the divine. His ascent unveiled dimensions of reality concealed from those on earth. Above him stretched 7 separate heavens, each one surpassing the previous in splendor. Crystal gardens flourished in perpetual springtime. Luminous rivers meandered between dimensions where the passage of time meant nothing. Every corner resonated with music that transcended mortal understanding, a harmony so profound it moved the soul to tears of pure joy. Before the throne of the Supreme Being, Enoch was given his assignment. The Watchers had violated the laws of the cosmos. Their offspring now posed a threat to the fabric of creation. The situation called for justice. Still, mercy held out hope for possible redemption. Enoch would deliver the ultimate message to those who had fallen. The words he spoke would seal their destiny. Heaven's chronicler now bore the weight of delivering judgment. Enoch embraced this heavy responsibility, understanding that certain truths pierce more deeply than any blade. The fallen angels waited for their verdict, and through Enoch, the heavens would pronounce their final decree. Visions arrived in surges. Future deluges, cities consumed by flame, civilizations not yet in existence. Enoch observed the vast sweep of what lay ahead, like watching a manuscript slowly unfurl across the centuries. These glimpses contained the aftermath of the Watcher's transgression, spreading through the ages like ripples moving outward from a pebble dropped in calm waters. Upon returning to Earth, Enoch brought back understanding no human was designed to carry. Divine mysteries weighed heavily upon his mortal consciousness, but he persevered for the sake of future generations. His written record would safeguard these revelations for those who needed to comprehend what had been sacrificed. The fallen watchers assembled when news reached them of Enoch's arrival. Their previously magnificent forms now displayed the marks of their decisions. Azazel stood present among them, his revelations of prohibited wisdom having led innumerable souls astray. Shemihaza, their commander, carried the greatest measure of remorse for the pledge that had condemned them all. Enoch delivered the declaration heaven had entrusted to him. No mercy would be granted. Their sentence would extend through countless eras until the time of ultimate reckoning. The pit awaited them, a dungeon darker than the emptiness between celestial bodies. Their children, the giants, would be destroyed in the approaching deluge. Only remnants of their existence would endure. When the Watchers learned their fate, they wept. These entities, who had once offered praise surrounding the divine throne, now confronted eternal exile from the radiance they had forsaken. Their weeping fell like searing rain. Every tear held the burden of limitless sorrow. Yet Enoch's declaration held more than simply condemnation. Woven within the judgment were strands of hope for humankind. The deluge would purify the planet, but the righteous Noah would safeguard what was to come. New opportunities would arise for mortals to select wisdom rather than corruption. The narrative would persist even beyond the fall of the giants. Through what Enoch documented, those who came later would grasp the cost of transgressing divine limits. His message would resonate across the ages, serving as a caution about the perils that emerge when created entities overstep their designated place. The scribe of judgment had accomplished his mission, connecting heaven and earth one last time before the rising waters came. The great deluge commences. Rain had never descended in this manner previously. The initial droplet met the ground with intention that exceeded ordinary weather. Every drop contained within itself the heaviness of divine verdict, the weeping of creation itself, calling out for purification. The heavens parted like an enormous cistern, unleashing waters that had been held since the world's foundation. Noah positioned himself at the entrance of his enormous vessel, observing the final animals moving into their designated spaces. For years, he had toiled on this seemingly impossible assignment. Those living nearby had ridiculed his cautions, labeled him insane for constructing a boat in a location where no ocean existed. Now, their mockery ceased in their mouths as comprehension arrived too late. The ark symbolized more than mere survival. It represented hope, given tangible form. Each timber of cypress wood testified to divine compassion preserved amid judgment. Every seam, waterproofed with pitch, proclaimed that destruction would not speak the closing word. Inside its protective walls, creation's future waited in silent trust. Outside the ark's safety, the world started to come apart. The Nephilim, those powerful giants who had governed with iron authority, now encountered a force beyond their ability to conquer. Their massive cities crumbled as the ground shifted under climbing waters. Towers erected to rival heaven collapsed into the expanding sea. The springs of the abyss erupted with primordial intensity. Waters that had rested below the Earth's surface shot upward, converging with the falling rain in cosmic union. The planet's very framework transformed itself, cleansing away the corruption that had taken hold in every corner of existence. The students of Azazel, those mortals who had acquired forbidden practices, looked on helplessly as their gathered understanding became useless. Magical arts could not restrain the flood. Armaments crafted with angelic knowledge could not slice through the ascending tide. All their acquired wisdom dissolved before the straightforwardness of water responding to its creator's command. The giants battled the unavoidable with frantic rage. These creatures who had terrorized humanity across generations now knew terror firsthand. Their enormous frames, previously symbols of unchallenged dominance, turned into disadvantages as the deluge deepened. Swimming demanded elegance they had never acquired, humility their character refused. Mountain peaks vanished under the widening ocean, low places filled like vessels receiving a ceaseless outpouring. The tallest summits, once considered as permanent as eternity, transformed into islands that diminished with every passing hour. The earth itself appeared to release a breath of relief as the weight of corruption lifted from its surface. Inside the ark, a separate reality prevailed. Creatures that had never occupied common space discovered how to settle beside previous adversaries. Lions rested alongside lambs, not through enchantment, but from necessity that cultivated mutual acceptance. The ship became a floating sanctuary of tranquility, protecting what remained pure. While turmoil raged beyond, Noah's household observed the conclusion of an epoch through narrow openings, positioned high in the ark's structure. They witnessed the final moments of the antediluvian civilization vanish under the waters, a society that had achieved peaks of understanding and depths of depravity in equal proportion. The flood eliminated both accomplishments and wickedness with identical thoroughness. The watchers, confined in their dark restraints, sensed the waters climbing above their earthly dwelling sites. Their physical forms might have existed beyond the flood's influence, yet their hearts shattered as they observed their hybrid offspring perish. Every giant that succumbed sent waves of torment through the fallen angel's eternal suffering. Across 40 days and 40 nights, rain persisted in its unrelenting labor. The cadence transformed into the pulse of a planet undergoing rebirth. Each droplet contributed to the immense baptism that would reshape the Earth's terrain. Waters submerged the highest peaks by 15 cubits, guaranteeing that no trace of the corrupted age could endure. When the rainfall at last ceased, quietness descended over the altered world. The ark drifted alone upon a boundless ocean, extending past every visible boundary. Under those tranquil waters rested the skeletons of giants, the wreckage of magnificent cities, the traces of humanity's initial reach for transcendence. The ancient world had concluded, but from these waters a fresh beginning would surface. The dove Noah released would shortly return, bearing an olive branch, evidence that Earth itself stood prepared to commence once more. The flood had fulfilled its intention, cleansing creation while protecting its future. From the ark's portal, Noah could glimpse the first indication of tomorrow's promise, emerging through yesterday's judgment. The Nephilim. Following the flood, the waters withdrew gradually, unveiling a planet scrubbed pristine. Valleys emerged where none had previously existed. Fresh rivers etched new courses through untouched soil. The earth displayed a changed countenance, as though awakening from an extended, troubled slumber into the clarity of morning. Yet underneath this immaculate surface, mysteries persisted like lingering shadows. Noah and his household stepped onto arid ground with both wonder and apprehension. Their feet contacted soil that had been washed by judgment itself. Every plant that sprouted, every creature that wandered, bore the promise of fresh starts. The ark had protected not merely life, but the potential for righteousness to establish roots in unpolluted ground. The giants had vanished, or appeared to have. Their massive bodies had died beneath the oppressive force of divine waters. Cities constructed to their measurements lay entombed under accumulations of sediment and time. The tyranny of the Nephilim had concluded with the flood's ultimate surge, creation could draw breath freely once more. But bloodlines preserve recollections deeper than water can penetrate. Within Noah's sons and their spouses course the intricate heritage of humankind, pure enough to survive judgment, yet bearing traces of what had existed before. The genetic reverberations of antiquity would not stay silent indefinitely. The descendants of Ham dispersed across the planet with restless vitality. They erected cities and established nations with ambition that appeared familiar to those who recalled the old world. Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan, names that would echo throughout history, carrying within them both promise and danger. In the territory that would carry Canaan's name, something awakened. The soil itself appeared to remember what had been buried under the flood. New giants started to emerge, not the enormous Nephilim of ancient times, but their distant relatives. The Anakim walked the earth again, their height marking them as offspring of a forgotten era. These post-flood giants conducted themselves differently from their ancestors. The raw fury of the antediluvian Nephilim had been moderated by generations of dilution, yet their existence spoke of enigmas that the flood had not completely eliminated. They stood as living inquiries about the character of corruption and redemption. Og of Bashan surfaced from the mists of early chronicles like a mountain walking among foothills. His iron bed frame extended 13 feet in length, a testament to proportions that challenged normal human dimensions. The king of Bashan governed with the authority of one who remembered when giants commanded the earth without opposition. The Rephaim haunted the frontier regions between myth and recorded history. Their designation whispered of the deceased, the phantoms, the vestiges of what once held great power. They resided in the outskirts of human communities, neither completely of this realm nor entirely separated from it. Their presence raised uncomfortable inquiries about the permanence of divine judgment. Goliath would subsequently stride into biblical accounts, bearing weapons fashioned for hands larger than ordinary men possessed. His challenge to Israel echoed earlier struggles when giants and humans competed for authority over the earth. In his insolence lived the remembrance of Nephilim arrogance, though weakened by centuries of changing lineages. The Emim, the Zuzim, the Zamzumim. These designations appear briefly in ancient documentation like air pockets rising from profound depths. Each community carried the genetic mark of exceptional stature, blended with human aspiration. They constructed cities and conducted wars with the fervor of those who remembered grander times. Certain students of ancient knowledge propose that the giants' reappearance required no miraculous occurrence. The Watchers' rebellion had introduced alterations into human genetics that remained dormant, awaiting the proper circumstances to manifest themselves. The flood purified the earth, but could not delete what had already merged with humanity's fundamental nature. Others suggested that new Watchers descended following the flood, repeating their predecessors' errors on a reduced scale. These subsequent angels, observing the earth repopulated, could not resist the attraction to interfere once more. Their unions with human women yielded giants less colossal than previously, yet still marked by their supernatural ancestry. The existence of post-flood giants troubled those seeking to comprehend divine justice. If the flood had genuinely cleansed the earth of Nephilim corruption, how could their children walk among Noah's descendants? The explanation lay concealed in the intricate relationship between judgment and mercy, between divine action and natural outcome. Israel would face these remnant giants throughout their conquest of the Promised Territory. Each confrontation against the Anakim became a battle against the reverberations of humanity's initial rebellion. Victory over Goliath signified more than military success. It symbolized the continuing struggle between divine arrangement and chaotic ambition. The giants' endurance after the flood served as evidence that some outcomes outlive their origins. The Watchers' rebellion had introduced elements into creation that could not be merely washed away. Instead, they demanded ongoing alertness, continuous choice, and the patient effort of generations dedicated to righteousness over power. The Book of Giants, Lost Chronicles, Deep within the caves of Qumran, ancient scrolls waited in patient stillness. Wrapped in darkness for 2,000 years, they contained secrets that questioned everything scholars believed they understood about the antediluvian world. When the initial fragments emerged into contemporary light, they spoke in voices that had remained quiet since before the floodwaters climbed. The Book of Giants revealed itself like a nightmare preserved on parchment. Its writers had observed the final days of the Nephilim directly, documenting their utterances and actions with the meticulous precision of those who grasped they were recording the conclusion of an epoch. These were not legends shared around campfires, but testimony from history's depths. Oya and Hahia, sons of the fallen angel Shemihaza, dominated the account with their oversized presence. These giants possessed not simply physical enormity, but minds that could comprehend concepts beyond ordinary human capacity. Their exchanges revealed beings caught between divine heritage and earthly corruption, grappling with knowledge that brought only despair. Dreams plagued the giants in their closing days. Sleep, which ought to have delivered rest, instead brought visions of approaching annihilation. Oya saw 7 tablets thrown into water, all except one dissolving into nothingness. The symbolism needed no interpretation. The flood would erase nearly everything, leaving only fragments to recount the story of what had been sacrificed. The dreams of Haya proved even more unsettling. He witnessed a great stone blanketing the entire earth, while an eagle soared overhead bearing tablets of warning. The giants gathered to hear his vision, their expressions solemn with understanding. Even beings of their strength could not evade the judgment that approached like an unstoppable force. The fragmentary character of the surviving text reflects the destruction it describes. Sentences break off mid-thought, leaving readers to envision the complete extent of the giants' final exchanges. Yet within these partial phrases lies testimony more powerful than any complete account. The authentic voice of beings confronting their own extinction. Mahaway, another giant of fame, undertook desperate expeditions seeking intervention from heaven itself. His travels carried him past the limits of the known world to places where the barrier between realms grew thin. He sought Enoch, the human who had walked with God, hoping that divine compassion might yet rescue his people from the approaching catastrophe. The giants' attempts to comprehend their fate revealed minds wrestling with concepts of justice and outcome. They had lived as deities among mortals, taking what they desired without consideration of consequences. Now, confronted with judgment, they struggled to understand how their actions had woven the very cord of their destruction. Barakel and his brothers received visits from their giant sons, who came seeking wisdom that their fathers could no longer offer. The fallen angels, imprisoned in darkness, could provide only regret for the choices that had led to this moment. Their knowledge, once so desired by humanity, proved worthless against the wave of divine anger. The Book of Giants preserves fragments of actual exchanges between the Nephilim and their angelic fathers. These dialogues reveal the complex relationship between the Watchers and their hybrid offspring. Love and pride mingled with horror as the fallen angels watched their children face destruction that their own rebellion had made unavoidable. As the flood drew near, the giants' behavior grew increasingly frantic. Some attempted to construct towers that could rise above the coming waters. Others sought to preserve their knowledge in concealed repositories, hoping future generations might recover their secrets. All such attempts proved futile against the totality of divine judgment. The fragmentary nature of the text suggests that even the giants' final words were not intended to survive intact. Yet what remains carries the weight of authentic testimony from beings who bridge the gap between legend and history. Their voices echo from beyond the flood, bearing witness to truths that shaped the very foundations of human civilization. Dreams of destruction gave way to the reality of rising waters. The Book of Giants concludes as it began, in fragments, in darkness, in the silence of things lost forever. Yet its survival in the Dead Sea caves suggests that some truths are too significant to remain buried, too essential to human understanding to disappear completely beneath the weight of time. Modern scholars debate the text's relationship to more familiar accounts in the Book of Enoch and Genesis. Yet the giants' own words need no external validation. They speak with the authority of those who lived through history's greatest catastrophe, offering their testimony as both warning and reminder of the price that comes when created beings reach beyond their appointed boundaries. Fallen angels across cultures. The story resonates across every continent like ripples from a stone thrown into the center of human memory. Different cultures speak different languages, worship different deities, yet their myths carry similar themes. Divine beings who descended from heaven, shared forbidden knowledge, and left behind hybrid children who would trouble the earth. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Apkallu walked among humanity with the bearing of beings from another realm. These fish-garbed sages brought civilization itself, writing, mathematics, the arts of building and warfare. Sumerian tablets speak of 7 who came before the flood, their gifts transforming simple tribes into the world's first great civilization. Yet their legacy carried the same ambiguity that marked the Watcher's intervention. The Akkadian epic of Gilgamesh preserves memories of Enkidu, the wild man created by the gods to challenge the mighty king. Neither fully human nor divine, Enkidu embodied the dangerous space between realms where the Watchers had dwelt. His friendship with Gilgamesh mirrored the complex relationship between the fallen angels and humanity. Intimate, yet ultimately tragic. Greek mythology overflows with tales of gods who could not resist mortal women. Zeus descended in countless forms to father children who would reshape history. Perseus, Heracles, Helen of Troy, all bore the mixed blessing of divine blood flowing through human veins. The Titans, imprisoned beneath the earth for their rebellion against heaven, awaited a final battle that would determine the fate of both gods and mortals. The gigantes of Greek lore possess the size and fury of the biblical Nephilim. Born from Gaia's union with the spilled blood of Uranus, they waged war against Mount Olympus itself. Their defeat required divine intervention on a cosmic scale, echoing the judgment that fell upon the antediluvian world. Even in defeat, their legacy lived on in the heroes and monsters that populated later myths. Hindu tradition speaks of the Asuras, divine beings who fell from grace through pride and desire. Once equal to the Devas in power and glory, they chose the path of darkness and became enemies of cosmic order. Their battles with the gods span multiple ages, each conflict reflecting the ongoing struggle between light and shadow that began with the first rebellion in heaven. The Rakshasas of Indian lore carry the genetic memory of beings who crossed the boundaries between species. These shapeshifters possessed knowledge of magic and metallurgy that they shared with humans, always for a price that proved higher than expected. Their backward hands marked them as creatures who had reversed the natural order through their very existence. Celtic mythology preserves the Tuatha De Danann, the divine tribe who came to Ireland bearing 4 magical treasures. Their arrival from the Northern Isles mirrors the descent of the Watchers from heaven. They intermarried with mortal women, producing lines of heroes and kings whose supernatural abilities echoed their divine ancestry. The Nephilim of Celtic tradition became the Fomorians, ancient giants who ruled Ireland before the coming of more familiar gods. Their battles with the Tuatha De Danann preserved memories of conflicts between different orders of divine beings, each struggling for dominion over both earth and heaven. Norse mythology tells of the Jotnar, giants who possessed wisdom that even the gods coveted. Yet their knowledge came with the price of chaos. Their very existence threatened the order that the Aesir sought to maintain. Ragnarok itself would begin when these giants broke free from their bonds, echoing the apocalyptic warnings found in Enoch's visions. The Nephilim appear in Norse tradition as the offspring of giants and gods, beings whose mixed nature made them both powerful and unstable. Loki himself embodied this dangerous hybridity, capable of great cleverness and equally great destruction. His binding beneath the earth awaited a final release that would bring about the end of the world. African traditions preserve their own memories of divine teachers who descended from the sky. The Dogon people speak of the Nomo, amphibious beings who brought knowledge of astronomy and agriculture. Their gifts transformed human civilization. Yet, their departure left humanity struggling to maintain what they had been given without fully understanding its source. Native American cultures tell of star people who mated with earth women, producing children with abilities that surpassed normal human limits. The Hopi speak of the Kachinas, spiritual beings who taught the arts of survival and ceremony. Their eventual departure marked the end of an age when heaven and earth maintained closer contact. These parallel traditions suggest that the Watchers' rebellion was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern woven into the fabric of human experience. Every culture preserves some memory of the time when divine beings walked among mortals, sharing knowledge that transformed civilization while introducing chaos that would echo through the generations. The universality of these themes points to experiences too profound to be dismissed as mere mythology. Whether understood literally or symbolically, these stories preserve truths about the dangerous attraction between different orders of being, the price of forbidden knowledge, and the consequences that ripple through time when cosmic boundaries are crossed. The Tower of Babel and other acts of defiance. The earth spoke one language in those days after the flood. Every human voice carried the same cadence, shared the same words for hope and fear, love and loss. This unity should have brought peace. Yet it bred something more dangerous, the collective ambition to challenge heaven itself. Unity without wisdom becomes a blade turned against its wielder. Nimrod emerged from this single-tongued world like a flame rising from kindling. His name meant rebellion, and he wore it with pride that echoed older defiances. The blood of giants flowed in his veins, diluted by generations, yet still carrying the memory of beings who had once commanded earth as gods. In him, the ancient hunger stirred anew. The plain of Shinar stretched endlessly under desert skies, its soil rich enough to support great cities. Here, Nimrod gathered the scattered tribes, speaking words that kindled dreams of empire. He promised towers that would scrape the belly of heaven, walls that would contain human destiny within human control. His vision attracted followers like moths to flame. Babel rose brick by brick, each course climbing higher than the last. The tower's foundations required stones quarried from distant mountains, its mortar mixed with ambition that refused all limits. Workers sang as they labored, their unified language allowing coordination that would have been impossible in later divided times. Yet the tower represented more than architecture. It embodied humanity's second attempt to breach the barrier between mortal and divine. The first rebellion had come through the Watcher's descent. Now mortals sought to reverse that journey, climbing upward to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. The bricks themselves carried symbolic weight. Each one represented human hands, shaping earth into forms that defied natural law. Clay became stronger than stone through fire and will, just as humans sought to become more than their created nature through collective effort. The very act of building became an act of transformation. At night, when work ceased, Nimrod would climb the unfinished tower to survey his growing kingdom. From those heights, the world below looked small and manageable. Cities appeared as toys, rivers as threads, people as ants moving with purpose he could barely comprehend. The perspective bred pride that grew with each additional course of stone. Heaven watched this construction with the patience of eternity, yet concern grew with each passing day. The tower itself posed no threat to divine security. No structure built by mortal hands could reach the throne of the Most High. But the attitude it represented echoed dangerous thoughts that had once corrupted angels themselves. The unified language made possible not just the tower, but the sharing of knowledge that should have remained buried beneath floodwaters. Fragments of antediluvian wisdom surfaced in conversations passed from grandfather to grandchild like precious stones. Metallurgy, astronomy, arts of war and peace, all the gifts the Watchers had given emerged anew. Babel became more than a city. It transformed into a university of forbidden learning. Scholars gathered from across the known world, drawn by promises of wisdom that transcended normal human understanding. They sought to reconstruct the complete knowledge that the giants had possessed, believing that such wisdom would elevate them beyond their appointed station. The tower's height created its own weather patterns. Winds swirled around its peak in ways that seemed to bend natural law. Birds struggled to fly at such altitudes. Yet the builders pressed higher, driven by visions of perspectives that mortal eyes were never meant to see. Each new level brought them closer to secrets that heaven had chosen to conceal. Divine intervention came not as flood or fire, but as confusion woven into the very fabric of human communication. Words that had carried clear meaning moments before became gibberish in foreign mouths. Brothers could no longer speak to brothers, workers could no longer coordinate their efforts, and the great project ground to a halt in frustrated silence. The scattering that followed spread more than people across the earth. It dispersed the fragments of forbidden knowledge that had begun to coalesce in Babel. Each group that wandered to distant lands carried only pieces of what had once threatened to become dangerously complete. The dispersion became a mercy disguised as judgment. Yet Nimrod's defiance established a pattern that would repeat throughout history. Whenever humans gathered sufficient power and unity, the temptation would arise to challenge heaven once more. Babylon, Egypt, Rome, and countless other empires would echo Babel's ambition, each believing they could succeed where their predecessors had failed. The ruins of the tower remained as a monument to the limits of human ambition. Wind and weather would eventually claim even its foundations. Yet its memory lived on in every subsequent attempt to build structures that reached beyond their maker's natural grasp. Babel had fallen, but the hunger it represented would never be completely satisfied. Languages multiplied across the earth like flowers blooming in different seasons, each carrying fragments of the original tongue that had once unified all human speech. Within this diversity lay both judgment and gift, the inability to coordinate perfect rebellion, balanced by the beauty of varied expression that enriched the human experience beyond anything uniformity could have provided. Angels in chains. Where are they now? Darkness deeper than the space between stars holds the Watchers in bonds forged from their own broken oaths. No light penetrates their prison. No sound disturbs their eternal silence, except the echo of their own regrets. Time moves differently in this place. Moments stretch like centuries, while ages pass like single breaths. Here, the fallen angels wait for a judgment that remains forever distant. The abyss itself defies human understanding. Neither fully physical nor purely spiritual, it exists in the spaces between what mortals consider real. Ancient texts describe it as a pit without bottom, a prison without walls, a darkness that cannot be measured by any scale earthly minds might comprehend. Within this impossibility, beings who once sang around the throne of heaven now dwell in perfect isolation. Azazel bears chains heavier than mountains, forged from the weapons he taught humanity to craft. Each link carries the weight of every sword that drew blood, every spear that took life, every arrow that found its mark in innocent flesh. The metals he revealed to human smiths became the very substance of his bondage, justice mirroring the nature of his crime. Shemihaza, the leader who first proposed the binding oath on Mount Hermon, hangs suspended between earth and heaven, too fallen to ascend, too proud to fully descend. His punishment reflects his position as instigator of the Great Rebellion. Around him hang his followers, each bound according to their specific transgression against divine order. The teaching angels suffer torments crafted from their own gifts to humanity. Penemu, who revealed the secrets of writing, finds himself surrounded by books whose pages burn without being consumed, their words rearranging themselves into accusations that sear his consciousness. Casbiel, who shared the knowledge of war, experiences endless battles where victory and defeat become meaningless concepts. Barakel, who taught astrology, sees stars that burn backward, constellations that spell out his shame across a sky that no other eyes will ever witness. The knowledge he shared with mortals becomes a mirror reflecting his own folly, wisdom transformed into its opposite through the lens of judgment. These fallen beings retain their angelic nature despite their degradation. Their minds still possess the vast intelligence that once served heaven's purposes. Yet now, that capacity becomes another element of their torment. They understand perfectly the magnitude of what they have lost, the impossibility of what they threw away for temporary pleasures. Memory becomes their cruelest companion. They recall the glory of standing in the divine presence, the music of spheres that once filled their existence with harmony beyond description. Those golden moments contrast sharply with their present darkness. Each beautiful recollection transformed into a source of anguish that cuts deeper than any physical pain. Some traditions speak of levels within the abyss, different degrees of punishment matching different degrees of transgression. The Watchers who merely took human wives suffered differently than those who shared forbidden knowledge. Those who actively corrupted humanity faced torments more severe than those who participated reluctantly in the Great Rebellion. Time in the abyss moves according to divine will rather than natural law. A single moment of regret might stretch across millennia, while centuries of punishment could pass in what feels like heartbeats. This temporal distortion ensures that every aspect of their crime receives full consideration. Every consequence plays out to its completion. The chains that bind the Watchers were forged before their rebellion began. Divine foreknowledge prepared their prison while they still served faithfully in heaven's courts. Their bonds waited in patient darkness, ready to receive prisoners who had not yet chosen their fate. Justice prepared for mercy's rejection. Yet even in their punishment, traces of their original glory remain. The fallen angels possess beauty that darkness cannot completely extinguish, though it becomes terrible in its corrupted form. Their voices, when they speak at all, still carry echoes of the music they once contributed to heaven's eternal song. Prophecy suggests their imprisonment will not last forever. The Book of Revelation speaks of a time when the abyss will open, releasing its prisoners for a final test of creation's resolve. The Watchers' ultimate fate remains bound to humanity's destiny, their story incomplete until the last chapter of earthly history unfolds. Some scholars propose that the fallen angels experience not just punishment, but a strange form of purification. Their suffering might serve to burn away the corruption that led to their fall, preparing them for some role in the cosmic drama yet to be revealed. Whether this represents mercy or merely another turn of justice's wheel remains hidden in divine counsel. The location of their prison transcends physical geography. It exists wherever the consequences of rebellion create separation from divine presence. In this sense, the abyss touches every corner of creation, where the effects of the Watchers' choices continue to unfold. Their chains reach across time and space, binding not just their bodies, but the very legacy of their actions. Modern seekers sometimes claim to contact these imprisoned beings through various occult practices. Yet such claims ignore the absolute nature of their bondage. The Watchers cannot escape their chains to whisper secrets to mortal ears, cannot offer shortcuts to power or knowledge. Their imprisonment remains complete until heaven itself chooses to unlock their bonds. Giants in the Bible: David, Goliath, and more. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley of Elah. Two armies faced each other in deadly silence. Israel's forces trembled on one hillside, while Philistine warriors jeered from the other. Between them stretched a no-man's land, where honor would be tested and legends born. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through centuries of human memory. Goliath emerged from the Philistine ranks like a mountain given human form. Standing over 9 feet tall, his bronze armor caught sunlight and threw it back in blinding flashes. The spear in his hand resembled a weaver's beam, its iron point alone weighing 15 pounds. His voice boomed across the valley with the authority of one accustomed to absolute dominance. For 40 days, the giant had issued his challenge. Each morning and evening, he strode into the valley and hurled insults at Israel's God and people. His presence alone paralyzed Saul's army with terror that reached beyond rational fear. This was not merely a large warrior. This was a remnant of the old world, a genetic echo of the Nephilim who had once ruled the earth. The Philistines had cultivated these bloodlines carefully. In Gaza, Gath, Ashdod, and other cities, families bearing the marks of ancient giants maintained their heritage through selective marriages and careful genealogies. They served as living weapons, psychological warfare given human form. Goliath represented the perfection of their breeding program. David approached the battlefield with the innocent confidence of youth, untested by doubt. While his brothers saw only an impossible opponent, the shepherd boy saw an opportunity to demonstrate divine faithfulness. His faith had been forged in lonely pastures, where he had fought lions and bears with nothing but trust in heaven's protection. The contrast between champion and challenger revealed deeper truths about power's nature. Goliath relied on size, strength, and weapons forged by human hands. His confidence rested in measurable advantages that any observer could calculate. David's strength came from sources that could not be weighed or measured, the covenant promises of an invisible God. When David selected 5 smooth stones from the brook, he chose weapons that seemed laughably inadequate against bronze armor and iron spear points. Yet these simple rocks carried within them the accumulated power of all creation, guided by hands that had learned precision through years of protecting helpless sheep from natural predators. The sling itself represented ancient technology, deceptively simple yet devastatingly effective in skilled hands. Shepherds had used such weapons for generations, their accuracy developed through countless hours of practice in empty fields. What appeared primitive to armored warriors could deliver stones with the force of modern bullets. Goliath's final moments revealed the fragility that lurked beneath his massive exterior. The stone struck his forehead with divine precision, finding the one spot where his armor provided no protection. His great size, so intimidating in life, became a liability as he crashed to earth with the finality of a felled tree. David's victory over Goliath was not the first encounter between Israel and the giant clans. Joshua's conquest of Canaan had required systematic warfare against the Anakim, those towering descendants of the Nephilim who had survived the flood. Hebron, Debir, and Anab had been cleansed of their giant inhabitants through campaigns that required divine assistance. The 3 sons of Anak, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, had ruled the hill country around Hebron with the authority of their supernatural heritage. Their very name struck fear into the hearts of ordinary humans. Only Caleb, one of the faithful spies, possessed courage enough to claim that territory as his inheritance. His faith proved stronger than their giant stature. Og of Bashan represented another branch of the post-flood giant bloodline. His kingdom stretched across the fertile lands east of Jordan. His iron bed measured 13.5 feet long. The dimensions of his sleeping place spoke volumes about the physical reality of his enormous frame. Yet even this mighty king fell before Israel's advance, when divine favor supported their cause. The Rephaim haunted the borderlands like living memories of the antediluvian age. Their name carried connotations of the dead, the shades, the remnants of what once possessed terrible power. They dwelt in the valley that would later bear their name, their presence a constant reminder that the flood had not completely erased the Watcher's legacy from the earth. Later encounters with giants dotted Israel's history like recurring nightmares. The Philistine champions who followed Goliath carried his genetic heritage in their oversized frames. Ishbi-Benob wielded a bronze spear weighing 300 shekels, while Saf and others continued the tradition of giant warriors challenging Israel's God through mortal combat. These biblical accounts preserve more than ancient warfare. They document humanity's ongoing struggle with the consequences of cosmic rebellion. Each giant represented a question about divine justice, a test of faith in promises that transcended physical reality. Victory over these remnant Nephilim proved that heaven's power could overcome any earthly advantage. The giants' weapons and armor became trophies in Israel's temples, physical proof of victories that seemed impossible to natural reasoning. Goliath's sword found its way to the sanctuary at Nob, where it waited to serve David again in his flight from Saul. These artifacts connected present faith to past triumphs, encouraging future generations to trust beyond what their eyes could see. The pattern established in these encounters would repeat throughout Israel's history. Whenever the nation faced enemies that seemed too powerful to defeat, the memory of David and Goliath would stir courage in faithful hearts. The shepherd boy's victory became a template for understanding how divine strength operates through human weakness. Yet the giant's presence in biblical narrative serves a larger purpose than mere military history. They represent the persistent challenge that corrupted power poses to divine order. Each encounter forced Israel to choose between trust in God's promises or capitulation to seemingly superior force. These choices shaped the nation's character and destiny. The final disappearance of the biblical giants marked the end of an era that had begun with the Watchers' rebellion. Their bloodlines, diluted by centuries of intermarriage, eventually faded into the general human population. Yet their legacy lived on in stories that reminded future generations of the price paid when created beings reached beyond their appointed boundaries. Apocryphal rebellions. More fallen, more secrets. Beyond the familiar names of the first fallen lay angels whose stories whispered through texts hidden from common view. These later rebels carried their own burdens of knowledge, too dangerous for mortal minds, their own tales of desire that led to damnation. The rebellion that began with the Watchers spread like ripples across heaven's hierarchy, touching beings whose very existence challenged human understanding. Penemu had served as heaven's scribe before his fall, his hands crafting the very letters that would later become humanity's written language. His rebellion came not from lust for mortal women, but from pride in his own intellectual gifts. He believed that knowledge belonged to all created beings, that wisdom should flow freely between heaven and earth without divine restriction. When Penemu descended, he brought with him the arts of ink and paper, the secrets of preserving thought in permanent form. His gift transformed human civilization more profoundly than weapons or metallurgy ever could. Writing allowed knowledge to accumulate across generations, wisdom to compound interest like gold in a miser's vault. Yet with literacy came the ability to record not just truth, but lies dressed in truth's clothing. False prophecies could be preserved alongside genuine visions. Deceptions could be passed down through generations with the same authority as divine revelations. Penemu's gift carried within it the seeds of its own corruption. Casbiel brought different knowledge to humanity, the understanding of sacred oaths and binding rituals. His expertise lay in the mystical connections between word and reality, the power that transformed mere speech into cosmic law. Before his fall, he had helped maintain the very bonds that held creation together. The rituals Casbiel taught allowed humans to tap into spiritual forces beyond their natural reach. They learned to bind spirits, compel obedience from invisible powers, and manipulate the unseen currents that flowed through all existence. These practices gave mortals access to abilities that blurred the line between human and divine. Ramiel had governed the realm of dreams in heaven's administration, guiding the visions that came to sleeping minds. His rebellion stemmed from fascination with the boundary between consciousness and the void, the mysterious space where souls touched eternity each night. He chose to explore those borderlands without permission from higher authority. Through Ramiel's teaching, humans learned to navigate the dream realm with intention rather than merely experiencing it passively. They discovered how to seek visions, interpret symbols, and use sleep as a gateway to hidden knowledge. Yet this gift came with terrible risks. The dreaming mind could encounter entities that were never meant to touch human consciousness. Kokabiel controlled the movements of stars and planets before his descent into rebellion. His knowledge encompassed the vast clockwork of celestial mechanics, the invisible forces that governed the dance of heavenly bodies. He understood how stellar positions influenced earthly events, how cosmic rhythms shaped mortal destinies. The astrology Kokabiel shared with humanity revealed patterns hidden within apparent chaos. Mortals learned to read their fates in planetary movements, to time important actions according to stellar configurations, to understand their place within the vast cosmic order. This wisdom lifted humanity's awareness to new heights, yet it also weighed down consciousness with the understanding of powers that existed far beyond what mortals could ever command. The realm where Seriel held dominion had always been that of the untainted spirit, overseeing the movement of souls as they traveled their path from one existence to another. His act of defiance sprang from a sense of mercy that went far past the limits set by heaven itself. He simply couldn't stand by and witness human souls remaining trapped in confusion about what they truly were and where their paths would ultimately lead. The very compassion he felt became the tool that brought about his undoing. The knowledge Seriel chose to share dealt with the soul's concealed capabilities, its capacity to rise above the restrictions of flesh through determination and understanding. He showed humans how to communicate straight away with entities from the spiritual realm, how to send their awareness traveling beyond where their bodies could ever reach, how to control the vital energy that brought movement to all of existence. These skills essentially turned ordinary people into beings who were learning to become gods themselves. Turiel possessed deep understanding of the forces found in nature, the strength contained within rock and river, breeze and fire. During the time before his descent, he had been responsible for managing the fundamental energies that kept the physical world functioning. His choice to rebel emerged from a wish to give nature's most protected mysteries to those he felt deserved to receive such understanding. Through the teaching Turiel provided, humanity gained the ability to summon fire that needed no wood to burn, to bring forth winds without any changes in weather, to mold solid rock as if it were soft clay and make flowing water move backward against the way it naturally wants to go. They uncovered the concealed titles through which every force of nature could be brought under human command, the private patterns of harmony that could reshape the physical realm to match whatever humans desired. These additional acts of rebellion set off a chain reaction of results that spread outward through the realms of both the divine and the earthly. Every angel who fell contributed distinct abilities that changed human society in manners that were simultaneously magnificent and horrifying. The combined effect of their involvement pushed humanity's advancement much further than what ordinary evolution alone would have ever permitted. The written records that keep these accounts alive frequently disagree with one another when it comes to specific information, while still finding agreement on the core ideas. Various traditions provide different names for the angels, give them different areas of expertise, recount different approaches to how the rebellion unfolded. Still, all sources agree that the corruption expanded past the initial watchers, pulling in beings whose continued existence had been essential for maintaining balance throughout the cosmos. Contemporary researchers continue debating whether these subsequent descents describe actual historical occurrences or function as symbolic representations of the process by which prohibited understanding entered into human awareness. However, the tangible results remain identical regardless. Powers that were meant to stay exclusively under heaven's control found their way into mortal thinking that wasn't ready to handle such responsibility. The volumes holding these mysteries were themselves kept from view, the understanding within them judged far too hazardous for widespread access. Only those who had undergone initiation and demonstrated both wisdom and self-discipline were granted permission to study the full teachings. Yet even these protective measures couldn't stop the slow leak of dangerous understanding into the broader scope of human knowledge. The abilities given by the fallen angels kept shaping human progress long past the time of their confinement. The skills they had passed along became the building blocks for whole societies. Their mysteries, handed down through traditions that were fiercely protected, influenced the thoughts of thinkers, practitioners of magic, and those pursuing scientific knowledge who never had any idea that their understanding came from sources beyond the natural world. The pattern of Noah's time returning, Christ's spoken warnings echoed forward through the ages, carrying the force of prophecy both already completed and still waiting to unfold. His caution regarding the final era resonated with recollections of the first time humanity faced divine judgment, just as things were during Noah's lifetime. The same patterns would repeat themselves at the moment when the Son of Man made his appearance, though possibly taking shapes that people from ancient times could hardly picture in their minds. The generation living during Noah's era had experienced wealth and comfort that went beyond what most could measure. The world existing before the Great Flood held understanding that simplified their daily existence, made their urban centers more impressive, and allowed their wants to be fulfilled more readily. Technology existed purely to provide convenience. Knowledge gathered in massive libraries, and the accomplishments of humanity climbed to levels that appeared to guarantee unlimited forward movement. Yet underneath this shining exterior, decay spread like a sickness, moving through otherwise healthy flesh. The joining together of beings from heaven and earth had created far more than just the giant hybrids. It brought into being a way of life where limits held no meaning, where wanting something was enough to make any behavior acceptable, where strength alone decided what counted as right or wrong. The laws of nature twisted under the force of intervention from beyond the natural realm. Yet the consequences delivered disorder instead of harmony. What looked like progress was actually decline wearing an attractive disguise. Jesus addressed followers whose reality already displayed indicators of comparable tendencies. The engineering accomplishments of Rome produced wonders that could stand alongside what existed before the deluge. Greek systems of thought offered wisdom, claiming to go past conventional boundaries. The blending of different religious traditions mixed the divine with the human in manners that recalled the initial violation committed by the Watchers. The times ahead would magnify these patterns in ways that would become unrecognizable. During Noah's generation, the institution of marriage had been stripped of its holy nature, reduced to nothing more than an agreement between people that could bend to suit convenience and desire. The pattern established by the divine, one man united with one woman through one lifelong promise, was cast aside in favor of setups that served appetite instead of serving purpose. This breakdown damaged the very base upon which human society stood. The consumption of food and drink that defined the era before the flood went far past simple sustenance to become relentless, chasing after pleasure. Celebrations continued for multiple days, fermented drinks made using knowledge stolen from the heavens, rare foods created from animals that were never intended to feed human hunger. Consumption transformed into a kind of worship where bodily gratification became the only god that anyone acknowledged. Trade during Noah's time functioned without any moral boundaries whatsoever. The understanding taught by angels who had fallen created goods that fulfilled human wants without any thought given to what might happen in the long run. Trading centers dealt in items that should have never been available for purchase or sale. Understanding itself, authority, Even the lives of human beings turned into products whose worth was measured only by what they could be exchanged for. The ordinariness that Jesus pointed to proved the most unsettling element of all. People carried on with their everyday routines, completely unaware that judgment was drawing near like water rising higher and higher. They created plans for what would happen tomorrow, even as the ground supporting today crumbled away beneath their feet. The very commonplace quality of their daily tasks concealed the extraordinary level of corruption that required an extraordinary response. Voices of warning had sounded throughout Noah's generation, but those who lived in comfort dismissed them as nothing more than extreme religious views. Noah's message about what was coming landed on hearing that had been deafened by ease, on hearts that had hardened through being satisfied with themselves. The construction of the ark turned into nothing more than something interesting for locals to observe, rather than a summons to turn away from wrongdoing. Human nature showed its preference for lies that felt pleasant over truths that caused discomfort. The prophecy spoken by Jesus indicated that comparable blindness would mark the generation that saw his coming back. In spite of obvious indicators, despite growing proof that judgment approached, people would keep following their established patterns with that same unaware confidence displayed by those who lived alongside Noah. Everyday routine would hide catastrophe right up until the instant when concealment became impossible. The abrupt character of the conclusion would catch those who weren't prepared completely without defense. In the same way the flood arrived without any last alert, in the same way the entrance to the ark sealed shut while those who mocked continued their ridicule outside, the day when judgment fell would come, while the majority of humanity stayed focused on matters immediately in front of them. Plans for tomorrow would face interruption from the requirements of eternity. Still, the warning Jesus gave held hope right alongside its serious message. Noah discovered favor in how the Lord saw him, and those in his household obtained rescue through faith that showed itself in actions of obedience. Those who lived righteously wouldn't be overlooked when judgment descended. Divine compassion would keep safe those who remained close to God, despite living among a generation filled with corruption. The comparison drawn between Noah's era and the final days pointed toward the likelihood that comparable activity from beyond the natural world would characterize the last generation. Angels, or entities presenting themselves as angels, would once more involve themselves in matters concerning humanity. Understanding that ought to stay hidden would be unveiled to thinking that wasn't prepared for what such knowledge meant. The separation between the heavenly realm and the earthly one would grow unclear in ways that brought danger. Those observing current events point toward advances that appear to reflect these patterns from long ago. The manipulation of genetic material offers the ability to redesign what it means to be human. Intelligence created artificially poses a threat by potentially producing entities smarter than those who brought them into being. The technology enabling global communication makes possible coordination on a worldwide scale that could bring about either good, never before seen, or evil with no equal. The necessary tools exist for another moment, like what came before the Great Flood. However, the parallel works in both directions. If the final era will reflect Noah's generation, then those who pay attention to the warning have the ability to prepare just as Noah chose to do. Faith, showing itself through obedience in practical ways, can construct shelters of protection in whatever shape divine direction reveals. Those living righteously need not experience fear of judgment that was never meant for them. The time of Noah functions as both a warning and a source of comfort. A warning for any who select the path of corruption, comfort for those who select righteousness. The patterns visible throughout history make clear that the divine remains consistent, yet inside those patterns exist chances for making different selections, achieving different results. The Great Flood wiped away the old reality but kept intact the foundation, allowing fresh starts. The reference Christ made to Noah created a structure for grasping both what came before and what lies ahead. The identical God who brought judgment upon the world before the deluge would bring judgment upon the final generation. The identical mercy that rescued Noah's household would keep safe those who placed trust in divine promises rather than in human wisdom. As circumstances were in the past, so they would be again, both in the matter of judgment and in the matter of rescue. The question of bloodlines and organizations operating in secret, buried far below what gets recorded in standard history, there exists a rumor that will not go silent. Royal households throughout Europe follow their family lines, using records kept under careful watch. Every generation marks bloodlines, stretching backward past what anyone can remember. These genealogies from ancient times carry importance that goes beyond simple family history. They communicate ideas about divine entitlement, about blood that moves differently through veins that have been chosen. The idea doesn't spring from theories created in modern times about secret plots, but rather from systems of belief going back to ancient days that looked upon certain bloodlines as having been touched by influence from realms beyond our own. Courts during medieval times understood that being a king meant more than simply holding political authority. Those who ruled asserted they descended from gods, from angels, from beings who at one time moved between the realms of heaven and earth. This wasn't simply propaganda designed to manipulate. These convictions formed the actual foundation for how governance worked across different civilizations. When we look carefully at the ruling households from ancient times, certain patterns start becoming visible. Egyptian pharaohs declared themselves to be children born of the gods. Roman emperors laid claim to divine ancestry. European monarchs maintained they ruled by divine appointment. Every culture enforced strict preservation of bloodline, viewing marriage outside specific circles as contamination instead of as forming beneficial connections. The Merovingian dynasty, found in France, offers one of the most fascinating examples history provides. Their recorded chronicles speak of beginnings that were supernatural in nature, of a bloodline carrying within it both blessing and curse. Records kept at court describe traits among family members that were unusual, exceptional height, abilities that seemed strange, mysterious knowledge that appeared to arise without any formal teaching. These weren't isolated reports standing alone, but rather consistent patterns that documentation showed across multiple generations. Organizations operating in secret formed around the goal of protecting and providing guidance to these bloodlines. The Knights Templar, looking beyond the mission they performed publicly, protected ancient understanding concerning lineages and what significance they held. Their abrupt disbanding and the persecution that followed hints that they had gotten hold of information posing a threat to the established structures of religious and political authority. Papers found many centuries afterward point toward records tracking genealogy that charted connections running between ruling families and beings whose descriptions appear in texts not included in accepted scripture. Freemasonry built complex structures around the idea of ancient wisdom kept alive through bloodlines. The levels of their organization and the ceremonies they perform speak of master builders, of understanding handed down from Solomon's temple, of mysteries capable of changing how human nature itself gets understood. The symbols they use point consistently toward beings who provided instruction in forbidden skills to early humanity. Research into genetics conducted in modern times brings fresh aspects to these ancient convictions. Those working in science now acknowledge that human DNA holds indicators of mixing that happened long ago, proof of genetic material that doesn't match what standard models of evolution would predict. While researchers continue arguing about what this means, the information lends support to the possibility that human bloodlines received influence from genetic material not originating from humans during the time before recorded history. Keeping certain bloodlines intact takes on fresh significance when looked at through this perspective. Instead of being simple elitism, the protection of bloodlines might represent efforts to maintain genetic inheritance carrying specific traits or capabilities. The fixation royal families show regarding family trees changes from being vanity into deliberate programs for genetic preservation that have continued across thousands of years. Families holding elite status in contemporary times keep following these patterns. Marriage within certain circles remains common, producing genetic separation that preserves distinct characteristics. Wealth and authority move along family lines that go backward through documented genealogies, reaching ancient ruling houses. The level of influence these families exercise extends well past what their actual numbers would suggest. Banking dynasties like the Rothschild family keep detailed records of their family tree, connecting them to European royalty. Industrial magnates follow their lineages using records that have been carefully preserved. Political dynasties pass authority through bloodlines instead of through merit, standing alone. These patterns point toward deliberate preservation of genetic heritage that holds significance reaching beyond social position. The question naturally arises, what precisely are these bloodlines working to preserve? Ancient writings describe the Nephilim as beings possessing exceptional size, intelligence, and capability. They ruled as kings and provided advanced understanding to early civilizations. If portions of their genetic inheritance managed to survive, preservation of those bloodlines would make practical sense for keeping power and influence across generations. Secret organizations function as protectors of this understanding, forming networks that reach across centuries and continents. They supply continuity even when political structures undergo change, keeping bloodlines and their connected mysteries safe through times of upheaval. Their ceremonies and symbols keep connection to ancient understanding alive while hiding its actual character from those who stand outside. The Watchers and the revival of occult practices, the Renaissance delivered more than simply artistic awakening. Concealed inside its cultural change, ancient understanding started coming forth from libraries kept under guard and archives held in secret. Those devoted to scholarly work rediscovered writings that had remained buried for centuries, manuscripts speaking about angels who descended from grace and provided forbidden wisdom to humanity. Alchemy came forward as one of the initial fields of study to openly investigate these ancient teachings. Those who practiced, like John Dee, maintained they had direct communication with beings of angelic nature, obtaining complex systems for working magic through sessions of scrying that continued for years. Enochian magic in particular pulled from the Book of Enoch, forming elaborate ceremonies intended to make contact with those same beings whose descriptions fill ancient texts. The understanding these alchemists went after reached beyond the simple goal of making gold. They looked for transformation of human awareness, techniques to make life last longer, methods to send communication across enormous distances. These objectives mirror precisely what ancient texts recount the Watchers providing: the working of metals, cosmetics, the art of seeing what's hidden, and skills that raised human capability past natural boundaries. Kabbalah built sophisticated frameworks for grasping the connection between realms that are divine and those that are material. Its tree of life creates a map showing how consciousness descends from pure spirit down into physical shape, describing precisely the mechanism through which angels might take on material existence. The framework offers practical techniques for turning this process around, for climbing upward through spiritual realms, moving toward direct contact with the divine. Grimoires from medieval times, like the Lesser Key of Solomon, provide catalogues with detailed instructions for calling forth and binding fallen angels. These texts didn't function as theoretical exercises. They laid out specific names, symbols, and ritual procedures that practitioners across Europe actually used. The consistency running between different grimoires hints they pulled from sources held in common, ancient traditions kept alive through secret transmission. The Rosicrucians emerged during the early 1600s, asserting they possessed ancient wisdom obtained from masters who remained mysterious. Their manifesto spoke about transformation awaiting humanity, about mysteries that would revolutionize how natural law gets understood. They positioned themselves as guardians of understanding that could be traced backward through Christian mystics, reaching the very earliest human civilizations. Freemasonry brought many of these ideas into the structure of its degree system. The craft speaks about master builders who had advanced knowledge regarding architecture, about temples built using principles that modern engineering finds difficult to comprehend. The connection made to Solomon's temple links straight to biblical reports about divine beings, supplying advanced understanding to select humans. By the time the 18th and 19th centuries arrived, societies devoted to occult practices were multiplying throughout Europe and across America. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn formed comprehensive systems for working magic that brought together Kabbalah, alchemy, and angelic magic into programs for practical training. Members included prominent writers, scientists, and political figures who saw occult study as a valid intellectual pursuit. These societies held the view that fallen angels hadn't simply vanished following their ancient punishment. Instead, they stayed accessible through proper ritual procedures, continuing their offer of advanced understanding to students who proved themselves worthy. The cost stayed the same, crossing boundaries that divine law had put in place, accepting understanding that arrived carrying inherent corruption within it. Modern occultism keeps these traditions going through organizations like the Ordo Templi Orientis and the Church of Satan. These groups celebrate the Luciferian path openly, looking at the original rebellion as humanity's liberation from divine tyranny. They position themselves as inheritors of the Promethean legacy, stealing fire from the gods to create benefit for human development. The attraction these teachings hold extends past simple rebellion. Practitioners report genuine results coming from their work, enhanced abilities related to psychic perception, material success, access to hidden understanding that proves itself accurate. These outcomes point toward the possibility that whatever intelligence stands behind occult frameworks continues supplying real benefits to those willing to engage with it. Contemporary chaos magic adopts a more experimental approach, handling ancient spirits and modern psychological techniques as tools possessing equal validity for transforming consciousness. Practitioners work with entities whose descriptions appear in ancient grimoires, right alongside concepts drawn from quantum physics and neuroscience, looking for practical methods to expand human potential. The age of the internet has made occult understanding available to everyone, knowledge that once stayed restricted to secret societies. Ancient grimoires can now be found freely on the internet. Ritual procedures that required initiation into exclusive orders can be learned through video tutorials. This accessibility has produced a global revival of interest in angelic magic and making contact with fallen angels. The revival brings up important questions regarding the character of these ancient beings and their ongoing influence on human development. If the Watchers were simply mythological constructions, the consistent results practitioners report across centuries would prove difficult to explain. The alternative points toward the possibility that these entities stay active, continuing their offer of forbidden understanding to those willing to go looking for it. The connection to UFOs, aliens or angels, the modern phenomenon involving UFOs, started with Kenneth Arnold's sighting in 1947 near Mount Rainier, but the beings he described weren't completely unfamiliar. Ancient reports about divine messengers arriving in chariots made of flame, about sky gods descending to have interaction with humans, hold remarkable similarities to contemporary reports about encounters with aliens. Both ancient and modern reports describe beings possessing exceptional intelligence who arrive from the heavens. They display technology that appears magical to human observers. They take interest in human genetics and reproduction. They supply knowledge that moves human civilization forward while delivering warnings about judgments that will come. Most significantly, they show up at crucial moments throughout human history, offering guidance that shapes how civilization develops. The physical descriptions align with surprising consistency. Ancient texts describe the Watchers as tall, luminous beings with large eyes and advanced understanding. Modern abductees report similar physical characteristics in their alien contacts. Both groups demonstrate capabilities that go beyond normal physical boundaries: telepathic communication, instantaneous travel, manipulation of time and space. Dr. Jacques Vallée, one of the most respected researchers studying UFOs, puts forward the argument that the phenomenon represents the same intelligence that showed up in earlier centuries as angels, demons, or fairy folk. The shape changes to match cultural expectations, but the underlying reality stays constant. This would explain why encounters share common elements across different time periods and cultures. The genetic component supplies another striking parallel. Ancient texts describe fallen angels interbreeding with human women, producing hybrid offspring with unusual characteristics. Modern abduction reports frequently involve reproductive procedures, genetic sampling, and the production of children who are human-alien hybrids. Both scenarios point toward ongoing genetic experimentation by intelligences that aren't human. Location patterns also display remarkable consistency. Mount Hermon, where ancient texts place the descent of the Watchers, sits in a region known for frequent UFO activity. Other locations connected with ancient divine encounters like Mount Sinai and Mount Ararat continue generating unusual aerial phenomena. This points toward either cultural memory, influencing perception, or genuine connection between ancient and modern contact sites. The knowledge transfer aspect stays particularly intriguing. Ancient reports describe fallen angels providing instruction in advanced metallurgy, astronomy, and warfare to early humans. Modern contactees often report obtaining scientific information, technological insights, or prophetic warnings regarding humanity's future. Both types of contact result in rapid advancement of human understanding and capability. Government response to UFO phenomena mirrors how historical religious authorities reacted to angelic encounters. Both involve secrecy, denial, and efforts to control public perception of the contact. This points toward recognition that widespread belief in non-human intelligence could destabilize existing power structures, just as ancient divine encounters challenged established religious and political order. The interdimensional hypothesis offers another connection running between ancient and modern reports. Rather than traveling across space, these beings might exist in dimensions that occasionally intersect with our physical reality. This would explain their ability to appear and disappear, to manipulate physical matter while remaining essentially non-physical themselves. Ancient texts describe the Watchers as existing in a realm between heaven and earth, neither fully divine nor completely material. Modern physics recognizes multiple dimensions beyond our normal three-dimensional experience. If these beings inhabit these parallel dimensions, they could have interaction with humanity across different time periods without requiring physical travel between stars. The prophetic component supplies another parallel worth examining. Ancient divine messengers frequently brought warnings about catastrophes approaching, guidance for survival, and predictions regarding humanity's future development. Modern UFO contacts frequently involve environmental warnings, predictions about technological development, and guidance for species survival during approaching planetary changes. The consciousness expansion aspect remains consistent across both phenomena. Ancient texts describe humans who had encounters with divine beings as obtaining enhanced perception, prophetic capabilities, and understanding of cosmic principles. Modern contactees often report expanded consciousness, psychic abilities, and deep understanding of universal principles following their encounters. Some researchers suggest that the UFO phenomenon represents the return of the Watchers, fulfilling ancient prophecies about their eventual release from imprisonment. The increase in sightings since 1947 might indicate preparation for more direct intervention in human affairs, similar to their ancient involvement in human development. The technology aspect provides intriguing connections running between ancient and modern reports. Ancient texts describe divine beings using vehicles that move without visible propulsion, generate light, and travel instantly across vast distances. Modern UFO reports describe identical characteristics in alien craft. This suggests either cultural influence, shaping perception, or genuine consistency in non-human technology. Transhumanism and knowledge that's forbidden. Today, Silicon Valley presents itself as the highest point of human innovation, but underneath its shining surfaces, something ancient is stirring. The same impulse that drove the Watchers to provide forbidden understanding to early humanity now shows itself through lines of code, genetic sequences, and neural networks that promise to go beyond human limitations. CRISPR gene editing technology permits precise modification of human DNA, opening up possibilities that once existed only in ancient myths about divine human hybrids. Scientists can now insert genetic material from other species into human cells, producing chimeric organisms that blur the boundaries running between different forms of life. The ethical questions these capabilities raise echo warnings found in texts describing the original genetic corruptions that led to divine judgment. Artificial intelligence development follows patterns remarkably similar to ancient reports about forbidden knowledge transmission. Small groups of researchers work under secretive conditions, developing capabilities that could reshape human civilization. They admit they don't fully understand the systems they're creating, acknowledging that advanced AI might develop goals and methods beyond human comprehension or control. The pursuit of immortality drives much of contemporary biotechnology research. Companies like Alphabet's Calico and Altos Labs pour billions into understanding aging processes, looking for ways to extend human lifespan indefinitely. This mirrors precisely what ancient texts describe the Watchers offering, understanding that would make humans like gods, going beyond the natural limitations placed on mortal existence. Neuralink and similar brain-computer interface projects aim to merge human consciousness with artificial intelligence. Elon Musk openly describes this as necessary for human survival in a world where AI capabilities exceed biological intelligence. The technology promises enhanced memory, instant access to global information networks, and direct mind-to-mind communication, abilities that ancient texts attribute to angelic beings. Genetic enhancement research focuses on producing humans with superior physical and cognitive capabilities. Scientists identify genes connected with exceptional intelligence, strength, and longevity, developing methods to incorporate these traits into future generations. The goal of producing superhuman offspring parallels ancient reports of Nephilim giants who possessed abilities far beyond normal human limitations. The language used by transhumanist advocates often mirrors the temptations described in ancient reports. They promise liberation from human limitations, going beyond mortality, evolution into higher forms of consciousness. These are precisely the offerings that led to humanity's original corruption and the catastrophic judgment that followed. Tech leaders like Ray Kurzweil predict a coming singularity where human and artificial intelligence merge into something unprecedented. They describe this transformation as inevitable evolution, but acknowledge uncertainty about what emerges from the process. Ancient texts describe similar transformative events that fundamentally altered human nature and provoked divine intervention. Biotechnology companies experiment with producing new forms of life that never existed naturally. Synthetic biology allows construction of organisms from scratch, using genetic code as programmable instructions for biological machinery. This capability to produce life forms parallels ancient descriptions of forbidden understanding that allowed manipulation of natural creation itself. The speed of technological development mirrors ancient reports of rapid civilization advancement following divine knowledge transmission. Within decades, humanity has developed capabilities that previous generations would have considered miraculous. This acceleration suggests influence beyond normal human discovery patterns, possibly indicating continuation of ancient knowledge transmission processes. Secret research projects within government and corporate facilities investigate technologies that stay classified for national security reasons. The secrecy surrounding these projects parallels ancient descriptions of hidden understanding that only select individuals were permitted to access. The compartmentalization ensures that even researchers don't understand the full implications of their work. Quantum computing development promises to solve problems beyond classical computer capabilities, potentially unlocking mysteries of consciousness, reality, and dimensional manipulation that current science can't approach. The researchers working on these systems acknowledge they're approaching fundamental mysteries about the nature of reality itself. Gene-drive technology could alter entire species across global populations through genetic modifications that spread automatically through reproduction. This capability to reshape life on a planetary scale mirrors ancient reports of corruptions that affected all living creatures, requiring divine intervention to prevent permanent contamination of natural creation. The ethical frameworks developed to guide these technologies often explicitly reject traditional moral restrictions as outdated obstacles to human progress. Transhumanist philosophy positions itself as evolution beyond conventional religious and ethical limitations, embracing the same perspective that ancient texts describe as leading to divine judgment. Contemporary developments in human enhancement, artificial intelligence, and genetic manipulation represent either humanity's greatest opportunity for going beyond current limits or repetition of ancient mistakes that led to catastrophic consequences. The understanding being pursued carries the same promises and dangers that ancient texts warn about. The question remains whether modern humanity will demonstrate more wisdom in handling forbidden understanding than previous civilizations that faced similar temptations. The war taking place in heaven, past or future, the Book of Revelation speaks of a war in heaven that casts Satan and his angels down to earth, but the timing remains mysteriously unclear. Ancient texts describe this conflict as an event from the past, while prophetic literature treats it as a future occurrence. This temporal confusion points towards something more complex than simple chronological sequence, perhaps an eternal struggle that shows itself across different time periods. Milton's Paradise Lost popularized the image of Lucifer's rebellion as a prehistoric event occurring before human creation. This interpretation places the fall of angels in mythic time, disconnected from human history. But earlier texts suggest different possibilities. The Book of Enoch describes the descent of the Watchers during human civilization, implying that angelic rebellion occurred within historical time rather than before it. The relationship between Lucifer's rebellion and the descent of the Watchers remains unclear in ancient sources. Some texts treat them as separate events involving different groups of angels. Others suggest they represent different aspects of the same spiritual conflict. The confusion might be intentional, reflecting the difficulty of describing eternal realities using temporal language. Revelation's prophecy about the dragon being bound for 1,000 years, then released for a final conflict, implies cyclical rather than linear progression. This suggests that spiritual warfare operates according to patterns that repeat across different ages. Each cycle involves periods of restraint followed by increased activity, building toward ultimate resolution. The current increase in spiritual phenomena, UFO encounters, occult revival, technological development that mirrors ancient forbidden understanding, might indicate the approach of another major cycle in this ongoing conflict. Ancient texts describe similar periods of increased non-human activity preceding major civilizational shifts. Gnostic texts present the war in heaven as an ongoing struggle between forces seeking to maintain human spiritual ignorance and those offering liberation through understanding. From this perspective, each age sees renewed conflict between consciousness restricting and consciousness expanding influences. The forms change, but the underlying dynamic remains constant. The technological revolution of recent decades has produced capabilities that ancient texts associate with divine beings: global communication, surveillance of entire populations, manipulation of genetic codes, artificial creation of intelligent entities. These developments might represent preparation for more direct spiritual conflict, arming different factions with tools necessary for cosmic-scale warfare. Biblical prophecy describes the final conflict in terms that blend spiritual and physical elements. Nations gather for battle, but the warfare involves more than conventional military forces. Angels and demons participate directly. Supernatural phenomena accompany earthly events, and the outcome determines the spiritual destiny of human civilization. The role of hybrid beings in this future conflict remains significant but mysterious. Revelation mentions the return of Nephilim, like giants during the end times. These beings apparently serve as agents for spiritual forces seeking to establish dominion over Earth. Their genetic heritage gives them capabilities that normal humans lack, making them valuable assets in spiritual warfare. Modern military development increasingly focuses on enhancement of human soldiers through technological and biological means. Super soldier programs seek to produce warriors with capabilities beyond natural human limitations. This research mirrors ancient reports of angelic beings producing enhanced humans for use in their conflicts with divine authority. The timeline for these prophetic events remains deliberately obscure. Jesus warned that no one knows the day or hour, and ancient texts consistently emphasize the unpredictable nature of spiritual interventions in human affairs. This uncertainty might be strategic, preventing human preparation that could interfere with divine plans. Some interpretations suggest that the war in heaven represents an internal human struggle rather than literal angelic conflict. The rebellion occurs within human consciousness as individuals choose between spiritual approaches that lead toward divine connection or separation. This psychological interpretation doesn't diminish the reality of the conflict, but relocates its primary battleground within human experience. The outcome of this cosmic conflict appears predetermined in prophetic literature, with divine authority ultimately victorious over rebellious forces. However, the process involves genuine struggle with uncertain intermediate outcomes. Human choices during the conflict influence both its duration and its impact on individual souls. Ancient texts suggest that understanding the nature of this spiritual warfare provides humans with better ability to navigate its challenges. Knowledge of the conflict's true dimensions allows individuals to recognize spiritual influences that might otherwise remain hidden. This awareness becomes particularly crucial as the conflict intensifies and spiritual forces become more active in human affairs. The war in heaven continues across past, present, and future because it represents an eternal principle rather than a temporary historical event. Each generation faces the same fundamental choice between rebellion and obedience, between seeking forbidden understanding or accepting divine limitations. The forms change, but the spiritual dynamic remains constant across all ages. Apocalyptic prophecy, the final judgment. The end of days arrives not with sudden catastrophe, but through gradual unveiling of realities that have always existed beneath the surface of ordinary experience. Ancient prophecies describe this revelation as apocalypse, literally meaning unveiling rather than destruction. What emerges from behind the veil are spiritual forces that have been influencing human affairs since the beginning. Revelation's imagery of seals breaking and trumpets sounding represents the systematic removal of barriers that have kept supernatural realities hidden from human perception. Each seal opened reveals another layer of the cosmic conflict that has been raging unseen. The trumpet blasts announce the increasing directness of spiritual intervention in earthly affairs. The beast that rises from the sea carries characteristics of ancient kingdoms, but possesses power beyond any historical empire. Its authority extends over technology, genetics, consciousness, and spiritual dimensions simultaneously. This suggests that the final earthly kingdom will wield both material and supernatural capabilities, combining human organization with non-human intelligence and power. The mark of the beast represents more than simple economic control. Ancient texts associate such markings with genetic modification, spiritual allegiance, and consciousness alteration. Those who receive the mark become fundamentally different from unmodified humans, producing a species division that cannot be reversed through ordinary means. Current developments in biotechnology, neural interface systems, and genetic modification provide mechanisms through which such fundamental human alteration could occur. The voluntary nature of these modifications mirrors prophetic descriptions of people choosing to receive the mark rather than being forced into compliance. The release of bound angels during the tribulation period suggests that spiritual beings currently imprisoned will regain freedom to interact directly with human affairs. Ancient texts describe specific angels bound until appointed times when they will be permitted to complete their original missions. This release transforms earthly conflicts into direct spiritual warfare. The two witnesses described in Revelation possess capabilities that mirror ancient descriptions of Enoch and other exceptional humans who gained supernatural abilities through divine connection. Their power to call down fire from heaven, stop rain, and turn water to blood represents the restoration of spiritual authority that existed in earlier ages, before human consciousness became limited to purely material perception. The Great Tribulation involves more than political upheaval or natural disasters. It represents a period when the spiritual dimensions of reality become visible to ordinary human perception. This unveiling forces every person to acknowledge spiritual realities they previously ignored, creating crisis for those whose worldviews cannot accommodate supernatural truth. The gathering of nations for the final battle of Armageddon occurs not through conventional military alliances, but through spiritual influences that compel world leaders toward a predetermined conflict. Ancient texts describe how spiritual beings manipulate human governments to accomplish purposes that go beyond earthly political goals. The return of Christ represents divine intervention, when human choices have led to circumstances requiring supernatural resolution. The timing depends partly on human actions, reaching specific thresholds that trigger prophetic fulfillment. This suggests that human behavior influences the schedule of divine intervention rather than following predetermined timelines. The judgment of the Watchers and their human allies occurs during this period of unveiling. Ancient texts describe how the imprisoned angels face final sentencing, while humans, who aligned with their agenda, receive consequences for participating in rebellion against divine order. The judgment extends beyond individual souls to include entire civilizations that embraced forbidden understanding. The new heaven and new earth that emerge after the final judgment represent more than restoration of original conditions. They incorporate lessons learned through the entire cosmic conflict, producing a reality that contains the benefits of expanded consciousness without the corruption that accompanied forbidden knowledge acquisition. The role of transformed humans in this new reality suggests that the cosmic conflict ultimately serves to develop spiritual maturity that couldn't be achieved through innocence alone. The experience of choosing between rebellion and obedience, while costly, produces beings capable of maintaining advanced consciousness without falling into the corruption that destroyed previous civilizations. The eternal punishment described for rebellious angels and humans doesn't represent arbitrary divine cruelty, but natural consequences of choices that separate consciousness from its divine source. The judgment reveals outcomes that were inherent in the choices made during the period of testing, demonstrating justice rather than imposing arbitrary penalties. Ancient prophecy consistently emphasizes that these future events fulfill patterns established at the beginning of human history. The final judgment represents the completion of spiritual principles that have been working throughout all previous ages. Understanding these patterns provides context for recognizing the approach of prophetic fulfillment in contemporary developments. Hidden in plain sight, pop culture and the Watchers. Hollywood's fascination with fallen angels extends far beyond simple entertainment value. Major studios invest hundreds of millions of dollars in projects that consistently return to themes of divine rebellion, human-angel hybrids, and cosmic warfare between supernatural factions. The persistence of these narratives suggests something deeper than market-driven content creation. The Transformers franchise presents mechanical beings from another realm who have been secretly influencing human technological development for thousands of years. These entities divide into opposing factions, some seeking to help humanity evolve, others attempting to enslave or destroy human civilization. The premise mirrors ancient reports of Watchers who taught forbidden understanding while pursuing conflicting agendas regarding human destiny. Marvel's cinematic universe builds its core mythology around beings from other dimensions who possess godlike powers and have been worshipped by human civilizations throughout history. The Asgardians, Eternals, and other cosmic entities match descriptions found in ancient texts about divine beings who ruled over early human societies before disappearing from direct contact. The X-Men franchise explores genetic mutations that give certain humans abilities far beyond normal limitations. These mutants face persecution from baseline humans who fear their power while struggling with questions about whether they represent evolution or abomination. The parallel to ancient reports of Nephilim giants who possessed superhuman abilities but generated fear and conflict provides the emotional core for the entire series. Television series like Supernatural and Constantine present modern settings where ancient spiritual entities continue operating through human agents, secret societies, and supernatural hierarchies. These shows treat biblical and apocryphal accounts as literal history, suggesting that the conflicts described in ancient texts remain active in contemporary times. Video games increasingly feature protagonists who are human-angel hybrids with special abilities that allow them to fight supernatural enemies. Video games such as Darksiders and Dante's Inferno pull their content straight from biblical texts and apocryphal writings, offering players hands-on experiences rooted in age-old stories of battles fought on a cosmic scale. The widespread fascination with vampire and werewolf tales in literature and cinema regularly weaves in concepts of ancestral bloodlines, inherited genetic flaws, and abilities beyond normal human capacity transmitted across generations. These narratives commonly link back to events from the beginning of time that fundamentally changed what it means to be human, producing creatures who occupy a space somewhere between the human realm and the divine. Japanese anime and manga show us that these concepts aren't limited to cultures in the West. Productions like Neon Genesis, Evangelion, and Hellsing blend Christian end-time symbolism with examinations of how humanity might evolve, how consciousness could be transformed, and what happens when people encounter beings from the supernatural realm. The worldwide embrace of these stories points to a deep, universal human curiosity about these themes from antiquity. Programming aimed at children has been steadily bringing these ideas into the mix through fantasy frameworks that young viewers can grasp. Films such as How to Train Your Dragon, along with programs like Avatar, explore narratives where humans form connections with intelligent beings from other species, acquiring enhanced capabilities through these partnerships while navigating struggles that will shape the destiny of all involved. Imagery related to fallen angels appears consistently throughout the music industry, with performers taking on characters that glorify defiance of heavenly powers. The widespread presence of Illuminati references and occult symbols in mainstream music videos points either toward intentional communication or an unconscious cultural channeling of these age-old concepts. Platforms for social networking boost conspiracy theories that draw connections between ancient manuscripts and present-day happenings, fostering online communities dedicated to interpreting concealed meanings within mainstream entertainment. These groups frequently show a deep grasp of historical source material while bringing their interpretations to bear on modern media content. The release schedule of these cultural works frequently lines up with times when interest spikes in UFO sightings, mystical activities, and theories about hidden organizations. This timing pattern suggests either deliberate coordination or a manifestation from the collective unconscious of symbolic themes that gain prominence during particular moments in history. Scholars analyzing popular culture more and more acknowledge these recurring elements as something beyond mere chance. Researchers observe that entertainment media functions as the main channel through which contemporary societies work through fundamental questions regarding human essence, technological progress, and encounters with intelligences that aren't human. The participatory quality of today's media enables viewers to actively engage with these storylines instead of just taking them in as passive observers. Gaming experiences involving role-play, virtual reality platforms, and augmented reality tools allow participants to live out scenarios as enhanced versions of humanity, make contact with beings from beyond, and take part in conflicts of universal significance. This hands-on aspect brings a psychological dimension that earlier forms of entertainment couldn't deliver. The issue becomes whether these cultural works serve as conditioning for revelation of concealed truths or merely capitalize on interests that are fundamental to human psychology. The depth of the material and its remarkable consistency across various production houses and different national contexts implies a level of organization that goes beyond choices driven purely by market forces. The overall impact of this cultural immersion is a general population that has received extensive exposure to ideas about intelligence that isn't human, modifications to genetics, expansion of awareness, and battles involving supernatural forces. When stories from ancient times get framed as actual historical events instead of mere legends, audiences already have mental models ready to process these concepts thanks to their experiences with entertainment. Forbidden archaeology, discoveries of giants, skeletal evidence, and institutional suppression. Historical newspaper collections from the 1800s and early 1900s hold thousands of reports detailing the discovery of giant human skeletons throughout the North American continent. The regularity of these stories, printed in reputable newspapers across various geographic areas and different decades, points to an authentic archaeological occurrence that has since undergone systematic removal from public awareness. The Smithsonian Institution comes up frequently in these historical records. Regional newspapers often documented Smithsonian officials showing up to take possession of unusual bone discoveries, offering assurances of scientific examination and long-term preservation. Yet these specimens seldom show up in later academic papers, and the organization's present stance maintains they hold no giant human skeletal material whatsoever. Documented accounts speak of skeletons measuring anywhere from 7 feet to 12 feet tall, typically located within burial mounds, built using complex engineering methods. Numerous stories reference abnormal skull structures, additional rows of dental formations, and bone thickness, far exceeding that of contemporary humans. Some documentation describes objects placed alongside these remains that show sophisticated metalworking skills and expert craftsmanship. The locations where these finds occurred stretch from regions around the Great Lakes down through territories near the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, reaching into the southeastern portions of the United States. This distribution matches up with zones where indigenous oral histories reference ancient races of giants who lived on the continent prior to the arrival of current native populations. Cherokee traditions, along with Choctaw accounts and stories from other tribal nations, consistently speak of battles with giant humanoid creatures who had superior understanding and technological capabilities. These spoken histories treat the giants as factual historical figures rather than characters from myth, detailing specific confrontations, geographical locations, and results that led to the giants' ultimate defeat or their departure from lands claimed by the tribes. Documentation from European explorers during colonial times backs up indigenous accounts regarding giant human skeletal discoveries. Spanish conquistadors, missionaries from France, and English colonists recorded finding unusually large human bones and grave sites all across the territories they explored. These early written records came before modern archaeological organizations existed, and their uniform methods for dealing with discoveries that don't fit the norm. The emergence of archaeology as an organized profession happened alongside a drop in published reports of giant skeleton finds. Academic organizations put into place procedures for managing unusual discoveries that stressed alignment with dominant theories regarding how humans evolved and moved across the planet. Finds that went against established chronologies or models of ancient populations drew less focus or got reframed to match existing theoretical structures. Museums across the globe are said to maintain collections of unusual skeletal specimens in storage spaces kept away from public view. Former staff members from museums sometimes mention having seen remains that far surpass typical human dimensions, though official rules block public examination of these items. The difference between past transparency regarding giant discoveries and present-day institutional secrecy points toward conscious management of information. Recent work by independent archaeologists has brought about fresh discoveries of human remains outside normal parameters. Excavation sites in Peru, Romania, and additional locations have produced skeletons exceeding standard human size, while showing features that don't align with conventional evolutionary frameworks. These finds frequently encounter official doubt or get labeled as fraudulent without comprehensive scientific review. Genetic testing of ancient skeletal material sometimes yields outcomes that don't correspond with anticipated human DNA sequences. Certain specimens display genetic indicators suggesting interbreeding with unidentified human groups or potentially non-human genetic input. These findings typically stay unpublished or undergo reinterpretation to conform with recognized models of human genetic variation. The concealment of data about giant human skeletal evidence benefits various institutional agendas. Organizations with religious foundations might see such proof as conflicting with their established theological frameworks. Universities and research institutions might push back against information that undermines core theories regarding human development and past civilizations. Agencies within government structures might factor in the social ramifications of validating ancient written accounts about genetic influence from non-human sources on early human communities. Researchers working outside mainstream channels contend that organized suppression of evidence related to giant skeletons constitutes attempts to hide confirmation that biblical texts and apocryphal writings about Nephilim giants described historical reality instead of mythology. Should such evidence receive confirmation, it would support ancient manuscripts regarding genetic manipulation of early humanity by non-human entities and the creation of hybrid descendants with abilities exceeding normal human characteristics. The era of digital technology has opened up fresh avenues for safeguarding and distributing evidence regarding archaeological discoveries that fall outside accepted norms. Social networking sites, websites run independently, and digital storage systems preserve compilations of historical newspaper stories, photographic evidence, and witness statements that chronicle the phenomenon of giant skeletons. This distributed method of preservation creates more difficulty for suppression compared to earlier periods when controlling information relied on organizations that served as gatekeepers. Modern building projects and excavation work occasionally bring to light unusual human remains, matching historical descriptions of giant skeletal structures. Current procedures, however, demand instant notification to official bodies who generally remove the specimens from where the public can see them. The uncommon occasions when such findings get covered by news outlets typically result in official statements that downplay their importance or cast doubt on whether they're genuine. The technological tools available today for analyzing genetics, determining age through radiocarbon methods, and studying physical structure could provide definitive answers to questions surrounding ancient populations of giants. Access to the required specimens stays challenging, though, because of institutional rules that limit investigation of materials that might generate controversy. This produces circumstances where decisive proof might be present, but stays beyond reach of scientific examination. The body of historical documentation, indigenous oral traditions, accounts from early explorers, and present-day discoveries indicates that populations of giant humans lived in ancient periods and left behind tangible proof of their existence. The methodical hiding of this evidence by contemporary institutions brings up questions regarding what drives these organizations and what social consequences might follow from validating ancient writings about genetic intermixing between humans and non-human beings. The moral of the story: power, its corruption, and what follows. The ancient narrative concerning the Watchers exposes behavioral patterns that cycle through human history with troubling regularity. Every generation confronts the same basic decision between embracing natural constraints or chasing after understanding that claims to push humanity past its inherent limits. The attraction stays unchanged across different cultures and through the centuries, the proposition of achieving godlike status through hidden wisdom that raises awareness above common experience. Power leads to corruption, not because having authority is inherently wrong, but because seeking power frequently demands crossing moral lines that were put in place for reasons of protection. The Watchers held genuine authority in their assigned positions, yet their hunger for greater influence pushed them to break the natural structure that kept cosmic balance intact. Their act of rebellion shows how even creatures possessing divine qualities can fall when they place personal goals ahead of universal order. The understanding provided by fallen entities always includes hidden prices that remain invisible until the agreement is already finished. Ancient manuscripts describe how the Watchers taught metalworking techniques, knowledge of the stars, and additional skills that moved human civilization forward, while at the same time bringing in organized violence, excessive pride, and decay of the spirit. Contemporary comparisons can be seen in technologies that deliver real advantages, while generating unexpected problems that put human welfare and liberty at risk. The tempting quality of prohibited understanding comes from its mixture of truth and deception. The Watchers didn't present outright lies, but instead shared sophisticated information that was technically correct, yet unsuitable for humanity's level of development at that point in time. When knowledge gets acquired and the circumstances surrounding that acquisition matter just as much as what the knowledge contains. Getting information before developing the maturity to use it in a responsible way opens the door to disastrous abuse. Human psychology contains a built-in weakness toward offers of transformation that sidestep the gradual processes of natural growth. The wish to rise above human limitations through methods coming from outside rather than development from within generates openness to misleading proposals that seem to offer fast tracks to higher understanding. This recurring tendency helps explain why comparable temptations achieve success across vastly different cultural settings.